The story begins with a sequence of images depicting supernatural creatures and a man dragging himself into his office. Then the scene shifts to his home where he was calmly watering his plants, drinking coffee, and at one point during the day watching a television show about a boy of ice who accesses his status menu. Shortly after, while holding a tablet and browsing an online store, he is mysteriously transported to a forest of gigantic trees, where a strange little green girl appears near him. My friends, up to this point, this is absolutely crazy, and I confess I'm finding it quite thrilling. So let's move forward. As soon as she disappears without a trace, the man, terrified, runs through the forest and comes across the skeleton of a warrior with a sword stuck in its chest. Imitating the boy from the television named Kai, he repeats the action he saw and orders the status menu to open. At that moment, a menu appears displaying his information. Kenichi Hamada, 38 years old, along with Shangri-La and item box. Thinking he has ended up in a world similar to Kai's, Kenichi wonders where his HP, MP skills and magic are. Clicking on Shangri-La, he accesses the online store where he usually shops. Then he opens the item box, but since it's empty, he puts some grass inside to test it before discarding it, and enchanted, he comments that being in another world is simply amazing. To further enjoy his experience, he tries to buy food through the menu but realizes he doesn't have enough credit. He even tries to sell the grass he collected to see if he can exchange it for food, but of course, the item has no value, frustrating him once again. However, as he looks around, he notices a sword in the remains of a warrior and trades it for food. After eating, he also buys a shovel and buries the warrior out of respect, since the warrior indirectly saved Kenichi's skin. And now, with the money from the sword, he buys a bicycle, leather work boots, a sports towel, a compass, and a monocle. Riding the bicycle, he thinks he needs to find a settlement to earn some cash to survive. Later, we see our protagonist preparing a meal using a pot, a stove, and other utensils. Taking advantage of his prior knowledge, Kenichi uses the money he earned to buy items and resell them at a higher price. Up to that point, he was doing very well in this world and was enjoying his adventurous stay. But trouble was on the horizon, folks. While the protagonist was enjoying his meal, several suspicious-looking wolves appeared nearby. Panicking, Kenichi searches for something in the store to defend himself. The first thing he sees is a bow and arrow, but since he's never used that weapon before, he dismisses the idea. Then he finds some rockets for sale and decides to pretend it's New Year's to see if the dogs in this world get scared. However, although the wolves retreat a bit, they simply decide not to give up on turning our protagonist into barbecue and remain nearby. Not wanting to fall behind, Kenichi buys a slingshot and shoots at the wolves several times. This time the wolves finally flee, allowing Kenichi to escape as quickly as possible on his bicycle, venturing deeper into the forest by late afternoon. At dawn, we see that he's exhausted after such an intense escape, and getting up, he wonders if he has reached the edge of the forest. To check, he buys a ladder and upon climbing it, spots a city protected by walls. Well, now he believes he will be safe since he'll be able to earn money and protect himself. With that in mind, he buys black pepper and a leather bag to try his luck within the walls. On the way, Kenichi is almost run over by a young man driving a cart and is surprised to hear him speaking Japanese, indicating that communication with the locals is possible. The cart driver offers him a ride to Dahlia, assuming that's his destination. At this point, he introduces himself as Fuyu, a merchant. Inside the cart, there is a woman whom Fuyu introduces as a traveling bard and his companion. After Kenichi says his name, the merchant comments on the man's strange clothes and unusual name, asking about his intentions in Dahlia. Kenichi says he wants to do business, but Fuyu notices that he has no luggage, which leads him to suspect that Kenichi has an item box. The bard then conjures her bandolin and plays a song about the fine rain that brought the man and the wind and rain in his journey's wake, and that his journey will begin from there. Sometime later, when they arrive in Dahlia, Kenichi helps Fuyu unload some boxes. In gratitude for the ride, he gives the merchant some black pepper. Fuyu wonders why he wants to sell such a dangerous item since the spy syndicate known as Bacopa holds a monopoly in the region and this pepper falls under that. He says that if those guys see Kenichi selling this spice, he will certainly have trouble. However, since it's a personal gift, Fuyu insists on paying, as according to him, local merchants love to buy things cheaply but never accept anything for free. With that, he gives Kenichi some strange coins and leaves. Kenichi examines the coins in the item box and sees that they are 1 copper coin, 1 square silver coin, and another silver coin. Since the value of these coins is described, he calculates that he has 108,311 yen. Wow, the guy made a fortune with just a handful of pepper. In the late afternoon, he goes to a tavern where a girl greets him, claiming it's the best in Dahlia. Kenichi informs her that he has come to stay, so the girl charges 1 copper coin for lodging or a small square silver coin for 2 meals. Since he only wanted lodging, the visitor pays the copper coin, but when he needs to sign his name on the tavern's list, he remembers that he doesn't know how to write in the local language. The girl notices his strange clothes and asks if he's looking for an intermediary. Actually, Kenichi tells her that he intends to do business on his own, but she explains that the Merchants Guild won't register someone who doesn't know how to read, write, and calculate. The man corrects her, saying he knows how to do those things, but perhaps not according to the local culture. At this point, the receptionist asks him to imagine that she has 4 bags containing 12 rinkas each, and asks how many rinkas she has in total. It would be funny if he answered that he would only know the answer if he were using apples. However, he correctly answers 48, and the girl is impressed by the mathematical talent of the genius before her. Then she asks for his name to write on the paper and introduces herself as Azalea. Kenichi asks her to teach him the local language in exchange for some snacks from another country as a reward, and the woman doesn't hesitate and accepts the offer. After savoring the sweets he gave her, she is so delighted that she makes a point of mentioning that there's nothing like them in the kingdom of Kadan. Fulfilling her part of the deal, Azalea teaches the foreigner the native language of Kadan, and he discovers that it's not so different from Japanese, with the numbers using the same decimal system and the digits being treated the same way as Arabic numerals. While posing for a drawing and seeing how quickly the man learned to read and write, Azalea imagines that he will soon become a great merchant and considers becoming his lover. Wow, folks, look at these ideas. However, Kenichi thinks she should avoid an old man like him, especially since he's old enough to be her father. But from the look in the girl's eyes, I don't think she thought of it that way. Sometime later, Kenichi finishes the drawing, leaving Azalea enchanted, feeling like a noble woman for having been portrayed. She then hugs the man affectionately, emphasizing that he gave her sweets and made her portrait, and with that, she takes him somewhere and turns off the lights in the room. I don't need to say anything else. The next morning, Kenichi, probably feeling very much at peace, goes to the guild to register, and the receptionist asks him to fill out a form. Noticing that the papers were handwritten, Kenichi deduces that they haven't discovered printing yet. After filling out the paperwork, he is informed that the registration fee is a whopping 50,000 yen, and our protagonist laments the absurd amount, wondering if he could pay in installments. The guild lady says that's possible, and then she hands the foreigner a guild identification card. She mentions that he must keep this identification visible when doing business, which is why Fuyu also carried one. After leaving the guild, he walks through the Dahlia market and observes that 2 slightly brown sheets of paper cost 1 copper coin, a simple dish costs 1 small square silver coin, and a low-quality knife costs 1 silver coin, which he considers expensive. Suddenly, a girl approaches Kenichi and offers 10 tricolored fruits for 1 copper coin. Wanting to try different types, he takes several and puts them in a bag. Although he has no idea what kind of fruits they are, to find out, he stores the foods where their names are written. The fruits are called Rinyo, Rinzu, and Rinka, the latter being the one Kenichi gave to Azalea when he returned to the tavern, in honor of the 4-basket calculation from earlier. The girl was extremely happy with the gift, as she loved that food. When Kenichi returned to his room, he spent some time analyzing his identification before falling asleep. At dawn, he surprised Azalea by demonstrating his carpentry skills, setting up a sales booth by himself. Additionally, the woman noticed the clips he was using and commented that hers were very weak, expressing interest in buying the ones he had, which made Kenichi see a profitable opportunity with this product. Later, he went to a spot on the street to summon his booth, which was stored in his item box. A merchant from the booth next door took a look at the foreigner's products and showed interest in the clips. Kenichi informed her that they cost 1 copper coin for 5 units, so she bought that amount and introduced herself as Anima. As the hours passed, no one visited their booths, and Kenichi began to get bored. However, as a bit more time passed, some people started showing curiosity about the items he was selling. His booth, mainly because of the clips, attracted more customers on the first day. Anima commented that the clips were selling well and thanked Kenichi for bringing customers to her booth as well. Grateful for the recognition, he realized he had made a profit of 15,000 yen. Perhaps it would be possible to live just by selling these clips, but it was likely that imitators offering similar products would soon appear. At that moment, a well-dressed man with a sword at his waist appeared at the booth, and Kenichi suspected he was someone of high status. The man asked to see a knife, and after testing its sharpness, asked the price. Kenichi replied that it cost 2 silver coins. The buyer thought it was expensive, but having never seen such a perfect blade, he understood the value. Then, he asked if the seller had something larger than the knife. Since Kenichi didn't, he checked the menu of his store while reflecting that finding something larger would be difficult. Still, he ended up finding a hunting sword and offered it to the interested party, who was impressed by its beauty. However, upon learning that it cost 1 gold coin, he internally struggled with his desire to acquire it as he considered the price too high. Kenichi wondered if he had charged too much, but he knew he needed to get the most out of those who could pay. In the midst of this, a catwoman approached the booth, sniffed the surroundings, and suddenly licked Kenichi's nose. Then she was hit by 3 beastmen who were discreetly following her. Kenichi was surprised as he had never seen humanoid creatures like those before. Meanwhile, one of the men tore off the tarp that served as the booth's roof and expressed interest in buying it. Kenichi agreed to sell, but when calculating the price for the 3 tarps the buyer wanted, he ended up confusing them, who were probably humans, and they suspected he was trying to cheat them. However, the swordsman assured them that the seller was correct, and embarrassed by their own distrust, the beastmen left with the tarps. And after that, the swordsman decided to buy the sword. After a long day of work, Kenichi paid for 5 nights of lodging. The scene then shifts, and we see a mansion where the maid Margaret showed her lady, named Primula, the clips she had bought. Impressed by the quality of the items, Primula decided to sell them in her store as well. After all, the motto of the Malo Mercantile Company was never to waste an opportunity. Returning to Kenichi, he decided to take a bath before nightfall and thought he wanted to take a hot bath. At that point, he thought about buying a barrel for bathing, filling it with river water, and heating it with fire, but he realized that if he wanted that kind of comfort, he would need to earn more money. Additionally, he wondered how that Shangri-La worked, since the products simply appeared out of nowhere for him. Reflecting on this, the merchant imagined that there must be some trick or scam involved, thinking that maybe even his soul was in danger because of it. However, one thing was certain: there was no way he could figure it out at that moment. The scene then shifts again, and we see a dirty little girl hunting a bird in the forest to eat. She mentions that her greatest desire is to eat until she's full. And while thinking about this, a man shouts the name Anemone, and the girl has to run away. The next day, Kenichi wakes up early again to set up his stall and continue with his plan, and just like him, Anima also repeats this routine with her mat. While our protagonist organizes the necklaces in his show, he reflects that they may not be made of quartz or diamond, but zirconia and polished glass should still be quite valuable in this world, and he thinks it would be great if he could attract a woman's attention with them. Meanwhile, Anama approaches and, upon seeing the neatly arranged accessories, comments that the shopkeeper always has good items in stock and wonders who the supplier is, but Kenichi smiles and replies that it's a trade secret. At that moment, Margaret, the same maid from yesterday, approaches Kenichi in search of 100 clothespins, which impresses the seller. Calculating the money he will earn, he enthusiastically separates the items, while Margaret glances at one of the necklaces on display. She asks if it's made of diamond, and Kenichi informs her that it's made of polished glass. He thinks to himself that it's actually zirconia, but the seller prefers not to mention that. He says the item costs 6 small silver coins, and the woman is surprised by the low price and asks him to reserve the necklace for her. While dismantling the stall to leave, Kenichi is approached by the beast folk from yesterday, and from the look on their faces, it seems like trouble is brewing. Miley sneaks up and catches the scent of spices on the merchant, and upon hearing this, the burly figures beg Kenichi to sell them some spices, although the human has no idea what they're talking about. Anama intervenes and asks the creatures to stop making absurd demands of the market newcomer, as it would be terrible if he ended up on the radar of Bacopa, the spice syndicate. With that, the trio bows to apologize while the onlookers watch the scene and await the outcome, imagining that the newcomer would never go against Bacopa, even if it involves the favorite food of the beast folk. This way, Kenichi understands that he cannot sell spices, but he thinks there's no harm in offering seasoned food. So he will prepare the food just this once, but they will have to eat near the river, on the outskirts of the city. Upon hearing these words, the creatures dance with joy, and Anama asks to join. Not wanting to waste time, the burly figures help dismantle the merchant's stall in seconds and drag him to the mentioned location. There, Kenichi asks his new friend to help him chop some vegetables, and she asks if they are really vegetables due to their color. Kenichi replies that they are from a foreign land but are quite tasty. To vary the menu, the beast folk catch some fish and eagerly await the meal. When it's finally ready, they get excited, and when they taste this type of food prepared by a human for the first time, they simply fall in love with it at the first bite. Anama even comments that they are eating with silver spoons, looking like nobles, but Kenichi mentally corrects her since the utensils are actually made of stainless steel. The creatures point out that a drink would go well with dinner, and Anama asks them to moderate themselves, but Kenichi is more relaxed and remembers that everyone is having fun, so he buys a 4-liter bottle of shashu online. The condition for the creatures to receive the drink is not to tell anyone about this meal, and everyone easily agrees. A little later, talking privately with the man, his fellow merchant asks if he isn't being too generous, but he sees no problem in forgetting reality from time to time. Miley approaches and asks for more drink, and the human takes the opportunity to introduce himself. Similarly, from right to left, the creatures introduce themselves as Nyakero, Nyamelo, and Nyanji. After that, the beast folk dive into the river to digest skillfully, and Kenichi throws a bar of soap so they can take a decent bath. After the bath, the merchant buys beds and warm blankets for everyone to lie on the grass, and everyone passes out right there, while Kenichi admires the sea of stars that enchants the sky with its beauty. When dawn arrives again and the boy returns to the inn, Azalea questions if he spent the night out. Not that she cares, since he paid for the room. Seeing no problem with the intrusion, he says he took a walk with the beast folk near the river, but Azalea replies that he could have stayed with her instead of some beast woman. Kenichi argues that it wasn't just women there, so Azalea hits his clothes and releases a few silky, shiny strands of hair from a beast woman. Later, while starting to set up his stall, the man wonders if Azalea has started to hate him because of this, but the truth is that he prefers not to dwell on it, as the peaceful life he so desires depends much more on his tranquil solitude than on someone who makes things complicated. In the midst of this, Margaret brings her mistress to the foreigner's shop, and then Primula approaches and enchants Kenichi with her extraordinary beauty, likely challenging all the words he had previously thought to himself. After controlling his feelings, he asks if the customer has come to buy the item he reserved for her, and Margaret makes the payment before receiving the necklace and passing it to her mistress. After hearing that the item is made of glass, Primula looks closer and asks if the seller is sure it's not real diamond. Kenichi confirms that it's polished glass, but even so, the woman wishes to see other necklaces, if they are available. Immediately, the shop owner shows more similar items, and Primula is impressed to see that he uses an item box to store them. Seeing everything there, she formally introduces herself to the shopkeeper and asks him to meet her father, the owner of the Mallow Trading Company. Anima mentions that the Mallows are major merchants in Dahlia, and that the company's boss is a kind and beloved man. Listening attentively, Kenichi sees this as his chance to establish contact with a large company. Shortly after accepting the proposal, they go by carriage to Primula's house to finalize the details, where our protagonist comments that he has never traveled in such a luxurious carriage before, and Primula laughs and replies that nobles have even more extravagant carriages. Then she mentions that she hired a craftsman to try to replicate the clothespins Kenichi sells, but the professional ended up failing, as according to him, the metal of the pin may seem simple, but it requires advanced technology to be manufactured. With that, they arrive at a mansion that leaves the man in awe, although Primula insists that it's small compared to a noble's house. Inside, Mallow introduces himself and praises the visitor's manners for doing the same. Kenichi presents the items that captivated the man's daughter, and the company owner himself seems to have fallen in love with them. Primula whispers something in her father's ear, and then he asks Kenichi if he really has an item box. The young seller confirms that he does, although it's small, and the older man mentions that he also has one, and that he used this box to make his company what it is today. In turn, Kenichi shares that he only uses it to store crops, which provokes laughter during the conversation. Speaking of which, the visitor asks why he is there, and Mallow offers Kenichi a position as a supplier for the trading company. The visitor wonders if the magnate can find the right market for these items and sell them at an even greater profit, and Mallow assures him that he can. In that case, Kenichi asks if it wouldn't be easier for the businessman to buy from his shop and resell later. Mallow comments that Kenichi might not like that, and he indeed confesses that he wouldn't. Moreover, Mallow reveals that there's a chance that rivals of the company might make a better offer, and closing a deal would be a way to ensure that doesn't happen. By the way, the businessman makes it clear that he couldn't stand to see any competitor signing an exclusive contract with Kenichi, as that would be the dumbest thing a merchant could do. Additionally, one of the secrets to the great profits of Mallow's trading company is, don't be fooled by the profit in front of you, as you might miss an even better business opportunity. With that said, Mallow offers to split the profits 50-50, and Kenichi accepts the offer. After signing the exclusive contract, Kenichi earned over 500,000 yen with the first products he supplied. Enchanted by the brooch, Primula herself offered 10 gold coins for it, which is equivalent to 2 million yen. Therefore, because of deals like this, Kenichi's balance in Shangri-La had already surpassed 8 digits, so he decided to buy a house. After all, now that he had money, the middle-aged man could start the peaceful life he always wanted. Always keeping this in mind, he crosses the outskirts of the city until he reaches the more remote and forested areas. At one point in the forest, he decides that he will settle there. However, when he returns to the inn and finds Azalea in his room, she warns him that the area is very dangerous. Kenichi acknowledges this and argues that he won't live too far from the city walls, but the girl insists that his desire is strange. In the following days, despite his friend's warnings, the man cuts the grass on the land where he will build his house using a modern lawnmower, also bought from the Shangri-La store, of course. The problem is that it runs on fuel, which is a challenge since there is no fuel around and it's not available in the store. To solve this, the merchant bought mixed gasoline for 2-stroke engines, which is quite expensive after all. There aren't many options besides this, as they don't sell fuel there. Eventually, he builds a road leading to his land, and after that, he cuts down some trees with a chainsaw and an axe. However, after completing this task, he tries to store the huge logs in his item box, but it's not possible due to their size. To solve this, he takes the electric saw and cuts the logs into smaller pieces to finally store them all. Once done, he discovers that the wood only fits if it's no longer than 10 meters. After that, seeing that night is approaching, the man decides to leave the rest of the work for the next day. When the sun rises again, our protagonist resumes the work of building his house. Along with the shovel, he digs around the extensive root of a tree to remove it from the land where the house will be. However, considering that there are still many more to dig, and he's already exhausted just with the first one, he gives up and buys an excavator. The problem is that he soon realizes that he impulsively spent 1.2 million yen. To make matters worse, this vehicle runs on diesel, which is also not sold in this world or in Shangri-La. To not waste the investment, the man buys kerosene for camping equipment. But, before impulsively pouring it into the excavator, he decides to test it in a diesel generator to avoid damaging the vehicle. In the end, After all this work, he manages to start the generator and celebrates his success. When night falls, Kenichi takes a bath in the nearby river, although he knows he needs to do something about the insects before they attack him. At that moment, the man remembers that Azalea recommended an insect-repellent stone sold at the tool shop near the market. When dawn breaks, Kenichi goes there and is greeted by an old man who, according to the merchant himself, looks very much like a wizard. While the attendant comments that he has never seen Kenichi in these lands before, he shares that he came from abroad, and the old man shows interest in buying interesting products from foreign territories. The protagonist asks if the shop has any insect-repellent stones, and promptly, the attendant extends his hand and informs that it costs 3 silver coins, a price the buyer finds too expensive. To haggle, he offers 2 oranges, and the seller reduces the price to 2 silver coins, including the fruits in the deal. After buying the stone, Kenichi sets up his stall and learns from Anama that the old man is a walking encyclopedia in Dahlia. That said, the man notices a wanted poster on the wall where the criminal depicted is Shaga, the leader of the bandits in this area. Meanwhile, deep in the forest, we see that a man is selling the blue-haired girl, and she is placed in a carriage full of girls, but the carriage is attacked by Shaga's gang on the way. Returning to the protagonist, he is having fun with his new diesel-powered toy, pulling out all the roots from the middle of his land, as despite the great effort, all of this is for his dream of a peaceful life in this world, although his bank balance after buying the excavator has melted away. The next day, the merchant goes to Lord Mallow to show the sugar he wants to sell. Kenichi had high expectations for this product, but judging by the man's reaction when tasting the food, it seems he didn't like it much. Mallow states that salt and sugar are indeed precious, but the kingdom holds exclusive rights to them, so he cannot buy from Kenichi. This frustrates the merchant, as he thought it would yield a good profit, but he had another ace up his sleeve, jewels that could be worth a good amount. After the meeting, Primula walks through the city and sees merchants passing through Dahlia, but she knows that the professional who stood out the most is someone she knows, Kenichi Hamada, with his incredible products never seen before in those parts. Upon returning home, Kenichi realizes he earned 15 gold coins from his dealings with the Mallow company, and with that, he can buy the long-dreamed-of wooden stall, which cost an impressive 1.7 million yen. However, as soon as he buys the product at the store, the house is literally thrown to the ground, completely disassembled. He reads the description of this blessed adult-sized Lego and discovers that he will need to assemble it himself, which is why it was so cheap. Not knowing what to do with all that wood, Kenichi sits on top of the pile and laments the work ahead. However, as the saying goes, he who has a friend has everything. And lo and behold, the beastmen he had met went hunting and found our protagonist there. As a way to repay the meal he had prepared for them that day, they helped Kenichi build his house. Meanwhile, the human kept his stall at the market and several weeks passed with his friends helping with the construction. He tells us that it took a little less than a month for the wooden cabin to be completed. After all that work, Kenichi lies down on his new bed to relax, but he is far from finishing everything he has planned for the place where he will live. In fact, he needs to set up electricity, as well as paint the walls and ceiling. Kenichi then tells us that it took him another month to complete these tasks. He built the fences, treated the wood, and prepared his bathroom to recycle waste as fertilizer. He also added a kitchen with a sink and for electricity installed 20 solar panels. Additionally, he built a small stall outside where he could use a drum for bathing, which he filled using a gasoline tank to transport water from the river. Delighted, he enjoys his first bath in the middle of the forest since arriving in this new world. At that moment, he realizes that his life as the ruler of his own domain had officially begun. The next day, he informs Azalea that he is moving to his new home, thanking her for everything she has done and saying goodbye, leaving the young woman surprised and sad. In the late afternoon, Kenichi arrives home and summons his bicycle to take a ride and snap some photos of the forest flowers, but unfortunately, we hit a snag, folks, as an arrow appears out of nowhere and hits the ground in front of the bicycle, causing our protagonist to fall off. To make matters worse, more arrows were shot at him, so he had to run to save his hide until he hid behind a tree trunk. Looking around, he realizes that the beast people were acting aggressively. Not wanting to fall behind, Kenichi summons his slingshot and shoots several times at the attackers, managing to take one down. He then sets off some fireworks to scare the beast people while summoning his tractor to end the chaos. And seeing that huge contraption approaching, the enemies finally flee. After getting rid of the danger, Kenichi tries to understand the motivation behind the attack, but his thoughts are interrupted when he hears the groan of an injured feline in the forest. Quickly, the man goes to the animal and sees it with an arrow stuck in its thigh. Since the animal showed hostility when he approached, Kenichi buys items to protect his arm and neck from a possible bite and removes the arrow from the feline's thigh, which is already too weak to react. He then cleans the wound with saline solution and uses alcohol and ointment to disinfect it, along with some painkillers. After doing this, the man fears the animal might not survive, so he decides to take it home in a wheelbarrow he bought exclusively for this purpose. Since there are probably no veterinarians in this world, Kenichi goes in search of some healing magic at a store, where the merchant says he was lucky to find the lynx, as their pelts are highly valued in the market. Later he returns to Anima, who finds it strange that he rescued an animal. In the midst of this, Miley shows up excited, as according to her, lynxes are messengers of the gods in her culture, and she would love to see the feline. Seeing the injured lynx, the girl is certain that it was the dogmen who did this and swears not to forgive them for it. Kenichi then applies more ointment to the animal's wound, which ends up licking the product, so the merchant decides to buy a collar to prevent this from happening again. Miley asks if Kenichi is a doctor, and he says no, although he knows how to administer first aid. Happy with the care he showed for a sacred animal, the beast woman decides to thank him on behalf of the lynx by hunting some birds, which serve for the barbecue in the late afternoon. After eating, Miley lies down on the bed and announces that she will spend the night there. Kenichi asks about her job, but the girl says she is more concerned about the lynx. The human warns that there is only one bed, so Miley takes the opportunity to suggest they sleep together. Well, this actually happens, and Miley sleeps like a cat on top of the protagonist. Several days later, the lynx was recovering well, so the homeowner started working on the plantation. The problem is that to water the plants, he would have to fetch water from the river every time, which is a big hassle. To fix this, the man thinks about digging a well. At night, things were calm as he slept near the lynx until the image of a huge tree appears, where Kenichi slept in the lap of a woman with purple hair. Then the lynx jumps on the poor man's belly, as if to say it's already fine. To confirm this theory, the feline goes to the door and makes it clear that it wants Kenichi to open it. When he does, the man sees the animal head into the forest and wishes it good luck. In the following days, Kenichi took a few more days off from his stall to tend to his land and finish the well. Lo and behold, a week later, he finally managed to pump water directly into the bath drum. In the midst of this, to his surprise, Primula showed up at his house marveling at everything around her. She explained that she was worried because Kenichi had disappeared from the market for so long, and Miley had told her about where he was living now. By the way, she asked what that giant metal thing was. Not knowing how to explain the tractor he had acquired, Kenichi lied that it was a familiar he had summoned, and that Primula should keep it a secret that he knew how to use magic. The girl, filled with innocence, confirms that she will keep the secret. Having gotten himself into this mess for free, Kenichi wondered if this woman could use it to blackmail him, although he thought she would never do such a thing, being who she was. As the sun was setting, he asked if it wasn't time for the city gates to close, and Primula confirmed it was. Confused, the man wanted to know where she planned to sleep that night, so she asked if he would let a woman like her sleep in the forest. He pointed out that there was only one bed, but Primula, of course, saw no problem with that, as she was used to sleeping huddled with several men on long shopping trips. Hearing this, Kenichi was left speechless. While the girl asked what that thing with water was, Kenichi explained that it was a bathtub, and Primula got excited about the idea of taking a bath there. Lo and behold, when night fell, she undressed and bathed to the sound of nocturnal birds. But instead of relaxing, she actually got scared and called Kenichi, who was nearby. He approached and suggested she could try bathing another time since she was scared, but she reminded him that the motto of the Mallow Company was, "Never let an opportunity pass." So Kenichi wondered what Primula would do if he were a bad person. But she didn't think a guy who saves animals and feeds beastmen could be bad, and well, she wasn't wrong. At bedtime, Primula came out of the bath and was amazed by the robe the protagonist had offered her. So much so that she even asked him to produce more to sell. Similarly, she also loved the nightgown, and faced with all the fantastic products this man had, she imagined that one day he could become the greatest merchant in all of Dahlia, if not the entire kingdom of Kaden. However, Kenichi mentions that he doesn't want any of that. also saying that he thinks attracting the attention of nobles would only bring him trouble, when all he really wants is enough to live a quiet life. Therefore, Primula promises never to mention her supplier's name to the nobles, and Kenichi thanks her for her consideration, finishing a drawing he was making of her. Later, already lying in her bed, Primula tried to call Kenichi and ask if he was already asleep, while the man pretended to be asleep to keep things calm. Meanwhile, in a remote region, Shaga was being served by the little girl with purple hair who was being used as his servant. Then another man arrives, pushing the child to the ground and handing a bag to the leader, who opens it and sees several gold coins and a letter assigning him a task. When dawn arrived, Kenichi took Primula home and thought about the excuse he would give her father upon arrival. However, once there, Mr. Mallow himself apologized for his daughter's behavior and said he didn't know who she had inherited it from, and the girl promptly assured him that she had inherited it from her father. While discussing business at this meeting, Mallow saw Kenichi's robes and nightgowns, which also included some intimate pieces capable of winning over even the most puritanical man's heart. Mallow was embarrassed to see this business in front of him, while his daughter fell in love with the look. Meanwhile, the maid Margaret arrived with some accounting books the boss had requested. Kenichi commented that it was to be expected from a great merchant to have so many books, but Mallow mentioned that the accounting system had changed, so he was having to rewrite everything because the neighboring empire had invented a system known as double-entry bookkeeping. Hearing these words, an alarm went off in our protagonist Kenichi's head, as this was something that existed in his old world. According to Mallow, this new rule spread quickly thanks to its creator. Then Mallow also showed interest in the bathtub Primula had mentioned, and Kenichi took the opportunity to show a prototype of the product outside. Arriving there, Mallow presented a clay pump, another product that was spreading quickly through the empire. And our protagonist obviously knew very well where the inspiration came from, as it was too much of a coincidence that this was happening right after the start of double-entry bookkeeping. In other words, Kenichi concluded that there was someone from his world in the empire. After that day, Primula began visiting Kenichi more frequently, and one night she informed him that she would be away for a month, starting the next day. Kenichi asked if it wouldn't have been better for her to sleep at home, but Primula wanted to try out that lingerie the man had mentioned at the meeting. He asked if the girl was trying to win someone over, so she admitted that the man was right in front of her, Buddy, and couldn't understand how a young woman like her could be attracted to a man like him. But Primula thought he was amazing, and that's what really mattered. He then tries to dodge the question by asking if her father would approve of such a thing. And she mentions that he would, which left our protagonist confused and made him ask for some time to process the information, as something like this involved a lot of responsibility and was moving from 0 to 100 too quickly. So Primula asked if they could at least share the same bed, and the man agreed, but only to sleep. Later, while she was already asleep, he wondered what Primula saw in a guy like him. The next morning, the woman returned to the city, so Kenichi was left alone at home at least for a few seconds, because that armored warrior had just appeared at his fence. He introduced himself as Norsepaul, and said he was investigating rumors that a suspicious man had started living in the forest, so he had just discovered it was Kenichi. With that said, Norsepaul asked what the hell those devices were, and since he couldn't call them solar panels, Kenichi tried to explain that it was something related to magic, which meant that now another person had to keep the secret that he was, in fact, a mage. In this case, Norsepaul went a step further and asked for a small favor, and Kenichi understood that he had to give up 3 steel ingots to buy his silence. Happy to have material to forge a good sword, the warrior shares that a mage with unique magic had appeared in the empire, capable of producing a large amount of a yellowish sauce called mayonnaise. And by the way, they say this guy defeated a dragon using mayonnaise, and I just wonder how that could be possible. Lo and behold, in the blink of an eye, a month passed, and now we are at the city market, where Kenichi awaited the arrival of Mallow's caravan. Meanwhile, while he was casually working, he overheard some people talking about an attack that had occurred, and well, it seems the trouble involved Primula, as Margaret herself showed up and called our protagonist. As the scene unfolds, we see Kenichi heading to the place where Mr. Mallow was on his knees, begging adventurers to rescue his daughter, but the men refused to face someone like Shaga. Some residents informed the merchants that the guild would need a few more days to organize preparations for an expedition, but he was desperate and couldn't wait. According to reports, Shaga's gang consisted of 50 henchmen, so with those numbers, few dared to confront them directly. The scene shifts perspective perspective to the bandits' hideout, where we see the leader himself throwing Primula into a cell, but he noticed she hadn't shed a single tear, which was expected from the daughter of a great company. Shaga commented that Primula was so beautiful that it made men drool, and soon she would be assigned to a certain nobleman who had a direct interest in her. Back to Malo, he finally reached Kenichi with his plea, begging on his knees for his daughter to be saved. At that moment, the man remembered the moments he had spent with her and impulsively said he would help. As soon as he said this, Kenichi realized he should have thought better, as this was a real situation involving real danger, and he was just a nobody with no combat experience. However, he reasoned that if he did nothing, who knows what could happen to Primula. Besides, he now had Shangri-La, which would be a great help. With this in mind, Kenichi asked for an advance payment for preparations, and Malo handed him 10 million yen without a second thought. After that, Kenichi discovered that Shaga's base was 50 kilometers south of Dahlia, in the ruins of an old mountain castle, which meant he would need a vehicle. After choosing one from the virtual store, he announced to everyone present that he would use summoning magic for something huge, so everyone should make space. With that, Kenichi summoned the truck-kun in the middle of the square and explained that this iron carriage could do everything he commanded without horses, and that he would take everyone who joined the fight, providing the best weapons for those who came aboard. He also mentioned the generous reward for Shaga's head, making this a chance for anyone who wanted to get rich. However, despite the merchant's efforts to convince people to join, it was clear that the crowd was terrified of the bandit and therefore didn't dare to join. For a moment, Kenichi found himself alone in this impossible mission, until he heard a meow in the crowd. It was the lynx with a pigeon in its mouth, who climbed directly onto the truck, showing it was willing to accompany the man who had saved it a month ago. Along with it, another feline appeared to join the group, Mayali, accompanied by her inseparable partners who would also join him. After all, as I've told you before, my dear friends, he who has friends has everything. Shortly after their arrival, Miley received a state-of-the-art composite bow and admitted she never imagined seeing something so well made. The other members of the group also received modern blades, much lighter, practical, and durable than what they were used to. Adding to the group, we see Norspol arriving carrying his latest sword, which was forged with the resources provided by Kenichi. According to the knight, hunting Shaga would be a battle worthy of his sword. Kenichi, though a bit scared by the man's bloodlust, didn't oppose his presence on the truck. Next, the old owner of the tool shop appeared to join the team. Kenichi warned that it was too risky for an old man, but the elderly adventurer proved he wasn't dead yet by summoning a powerful fireball on the ground. Finally, even Anama showed up to climb onto the truck, arguing that it would be cruel to leave her out. Kenichi reminded her it would be a dangerous fight, but she insisted she could at least prepare the food, promising to flee if things got too dangerous. And with that statement, Kenichi pulled her into the vehicle. After that, he asked again who else would join the group to face Shaga, but as he repeated the announcement, the crowd left until no one remained. When Kenichi realized the group was formed, Malo asked to come along, but our protagonist said he should tend to his injuries first and save a big smile for when his daughter returned home safely. With that settled, Kenichi went to the Adventurers Guild and accepted the Shaga mission, also paying a silver coin to register with the guild. After that, he set off with his companions toward the objective, leaving behind the incredulous crowd, as no one imagined such a small group would actually confront the most dangerous bandit in the region. Some even accused the group of running off with Malo's money without completing the mission. But despite the disdain, Kenichi and the others set out to do what they had truly set out to do. After all, as he said, there comes a time when a man must fight, even knowing he might lose. Actually, he thinks some old pirate said that, but Kenichi liked the phrase. Meanwhile, in another scene shift, Primula saw the door to her cell open, and a young girl with purple hair entered with bread to offer her. Seeing the girl's stomach growling, the woman let her eat the food, and though she initially insisted Primula keep the bread, the girl didn't resist much, as she was starving and quickly devoured the bread. Realizing the little one was also a prisoner, Primula said they would escape together as help would surely come. The girl asked if it would be God's help, and Primula said yes, though she was surprised by the question. Back to the rescue group, they continued their journey in the truck-kun until they camped in the late afternoon. Kenichi prepared a soup with vegetables and horned rabbit meat, and everyone was satisfied with the quality of the food. However, the tribe members also seemed interested in the cat food Kenichi bought for the lynx, so the merchant made an exception and let them try it, and in the midst of it, even the old man joined in to taste the cat's food pouch. After the meal, Kenichi explained the strategy he wanted to use, and Norspal and the mage fully agreed. The cats admitted they weren't good at using their brains, so they left that part to the others. Finally, Anama said she would stay at the camp, as she wouldn't be useful in battle, promising to wait for news by the agreed deadline. After that, using a modern low-power communicator, Miley was terrified to discover how the device worked, as she simply heard Kenichi's voice through the device and had no idea how it was possible. But after the initial shock, she informed him they were close to arriving. The mage commented to Kenichi that not even the Empire's sorcerers had magical devices like these, and the merchant asked him to pretend he saw nothing. After that, he got into the truck to head to the castle and said he was counting on Anama, who, in turn, repeated her role before departure, explaining to us that if the group didn't return in a day, she would have to go back to the guild and report the mission's failure. With all that, the truck finally set off to begin the crucial part of the plan. In the middle of the night, Kenichi asked over the communicator what Miley was seeing, and she reported that the wall had watchtowers with guards, but the men were getting drunk. Faced with this, the invading group thought it was the ideal time to attack and prepared for it, while Kenichi received from the cats a kind of battle food similar to a nut. When he bit into it, he felt an extremely bitter taste, and when the effect hit, our protagonist felt completely high, thinking that even though he was about to face death, he simply couldn't stop laughing. As he drove toward the enemy castle, the man felt as if he had embodied Toretto himself, in a Fast and Furious movie where nothing matters but family. Meanwhile, in the castle, the men who could stop Kenichi continued drowning in their drinks around their bonfires. In the castle cells, a somber atmosphere dominated. Outside, Miley aimed her bow and remembered Kenichi's instructions. She would be the first to act to eliminate the guards. In the midst of this, the two gate guards noticed the glow of the truck's headlights approaching and thought it was some kind of monster until arrows struck them, knocking the men down instantly. After that, Miley returned to the truck and they headed to the main gate. As agreed earlier, the old mage took responsibility for dealing with the entrance, so he cast an explosion spell that completely destroyed the gate, ensuring the vehicle's passage, as planned in the pre-attack meeting. The group would attack while the enemies were drinking, as they would be drunk and unarmored. When the truck entered the castle, the allies asked the mage to cast another spell like the first, but he lamented that he wouldn't be able to conjure another due to lack of energy. Even so, the fighters got out of the vehicle and began the attack, catching the bandits completely off guard. Although the cats and Norspal were truly formidable warriors, Kenichi, on the other hand, was completely lost. In the midst of the chaos, a bandit approached him from behind with a knife, but the lynx managed to knock the man down in time, allowing Miley to finish him with an arrow. At that moment, many men emerged from inside the ruins with all their fury, leaving the invaders apprehensive, except Kenichi, who was high from the effects of the dubious nut. As if he were in an unusual Isekai anime, he then summoned his excavator and left the bandit stunned, especially when he turned on the vehicle's spotlight and charged at the men. The cats then took advantage of this moment of hesitation to resume the attack, along with Norspal, who demonstrated great skill by easily defeating opponents with his new sword. In the midst of all this, Kenichi used his excavator mercilessly and knocked down the walls of the cell where Primula was. He then heard screams coming from the other side of the breach, and seeing that intense light coming from the hole, the purple-haired girl thought she was in the presence of God. Meanwhile, Kenichi didn't see Primula anywhere and grew even more worried. At that moment, Shaga appeared holding a woman as a hostage. Thinking they had come to rescue the noblewoman. To show he wasn't joking, the villain tore part of the woman's clothes and said that if he had known things would come to this, he would have had fun with her earlier. In the midst of this, without showing what he was doing, Kenichi asked Miley to notice where he was pointing the laser sight at Shaga, and even without looking, the cat moved her ears to sharpen her senses. Kenichi explained that he would blind the bandit with this light, so the archer would take him down with her bow. And as planned, Kenichi pointed the laser at Shaga's eye, causing him to release Primula. At the same moment, Miley shot the man, with the arrow hitting his shoulder, giving the hostage time to flee into Kenichi's arms. The bandit didn't give up and prepared to throw his sword, but a mysterious wind pushed him, leaving him face to face with Miley, who had her bow aimed at him once more. The cat promised she wouldn't miss this time, and kept her word by hitting the leader's forehead. Meanwhile, Primula kept running until she finally reached Kenichi and hugged him. And perhaps because of the nut's effect, the man felt an overwhelming urge to grab the girl right then and there. but he did everything to restrain his impulses. After the rescue, Nyanji ran back to the camp to inform Anama of the mission's success, and while that happened, Kenichi bought clothes for the women there and arranged for them to take a bath. Additionally, for the purple-haired girl, he gave Premiula scissors to cut the child's hair. Enchanted by the scissors, the woman forgot her condition and asked if she could sell these in her company. But in that slip, she realized her towel had fallen, and she ran off, embarrassed. After the bath and properly dressed, the younger girl introduced herself as Anemone and handed over a letter sent by the nobleman Shega had mentioned, who was responsible for the kidnapping. When the group returned to the camp, Anama cried with relief seeing everyone safe, as it had seemed all was lost. Noticing a child among them, she commented that her own daughter would be the same age, if she were still alive. Kenichi didn't know his friend had a daughter, and she explained that tragically, the girl had died during an epidemic. Shortly after, the freed women went to sleep peacefully after the chaos, while the group planned to return to Dahlia in the morning, remembering they still had the unpleasant task of dealing with the bandits' bodies. But due to exhaustion, Kenichi fell asleep next to Primula and Anemone, and the next day he takes the group back to the city in his truck con, and upon seeing his daughter step out of the vehicle, Mallow gets emotional and runs to hug her. Even though he is happy, he shows a keen sense for good things, as while hugging his daughter, he comments on the high quality of the shirt she is wearing, leading the two to enthusiastically agree that it could sell well in his store. Kenichi finds it strange that their emotional reunion turns into a business meeting, until Mallow personally thanks him for what he did. Meanwhile, the businessman asks if Kenichi has placed, let's say, the consequence of the mission in his item box, and Kenichi confirms, embarrassed, that he has, emphasizing that his item box has become a true war trench. The day before, while people were eating, Kenichi discovered that the heads of the defeated enemies should be placed separately in the item box as proof of his victory, identifying the wanted individuals. The cats make it clear that this is a common practice among adventurers, so Kenichi needs to get used to it, especially since the heads start to stink after a while, and one must be prepared to endure the stench. Upon hearing this, Kenichi realizes that this world is no joke, and speaking of jokes, his leisurely and peaceful life seems to be going down the drain with this unpleasant news. After that, he gathered all the weapons and armor taken from the bandits, as well as 100 gold coins from the hideout, rugs, drinks, jewels, and lots of junk, and everything obviously ended up in the citizen's item box. After collecting the items, the protagonist offers to take the freed prisoners back to their homeland, but none of them want that, as their families have been killed and they would have nowhere to stay. Because of this, Kenichi suggests that they go to Dahlia with him, as it is a city with many people where they could look for work and try to restart their lives. Primula adds that the Mallow Company could even help them, and this offer convinces the women. Kenichi asks where the village of Anemone is, and she replies that she was born in Urup, and unfortunately, Primula says it is quite far, about 800 kilometers away. Even so, Kenichi offers to take the girl, but she shakes her head negatively. Anama argues that the child must have been sold to reduce the number of mouths to feed, so Kenichi invites her to go to Dahlia with everyone. Thus, the man begins transporting everyone to their respective places, each where they wish to be dropped off. During a conversation among the women on a night of dining at the camp, Anama says that the best quality in a man is his honesty, and Primula, attentive to this, asks if Kenichi would be a good choice, but she emphasizes that no, because men like him don't care about women, also saying that if he finds something he truly wants to do, he will certainly leave a woman behind to pursue his goal. Kenichi hears this part of the conversation with a serious look but remains silent. Finally, the next day, the former prisoners who still had someone reunite with their families. Upon arriving in Dahlia, the guild receptionist panics upon seeing Shaga's head being displayed before her by the cats. Another employee approaches and asks how many heads the adventurers have, and Kenichi replies that there are 52, shocking everyone. Later, as the guild members begin examining the heads, Kenichi steps away to catch his breath, but the mage approaches and comments that the young man's magic is exceptional, as is his item box, which will certainly complicate his life if the nobles find out what he can do. About this, Kenichi asks that if possible he doesn't spill the beans, and if that happens everything will be fine, and if things get ugly, he will leave immediately. At that moment, Norsepaul arrives and announces that he is about to see the local lord.
Count Asclepius. Kenichi asks if he will report that nobles were involved with Shaga, and the knight confirms. The inspection of the heads lasts until nightfall, and the total payment is a whopping 861 gold coins. After receiving a sheet with some reward for the service rendered, Anama returns it, feeling she did nothing to deserve it. In fact, she would like to take care of Anemone because of what happened to her son. And Kenichi understands the woman's need to have someone to care for, so he gives her that responsibility. As they leave the guild, Kenichi sees people celebrating in the streets the fact that Shaga has been killed, along with the troop responsible for the successful expedition, like the cats. Speaking of them, since Anama refused the reward, Kenichi divided it among the other 7 members of the group, so each received 123 gold coins. Kenichi goes to the lynx and gives it some food, saying he decided to spend the night in the city since the gates close at that hour. To enjoy the night, he goes to the Azalea Tavern, where a woman sings about someone who opened the gates of hell. Azalea is thrilled to reunite with her friend and asks if it's true that he defeated a band of bandits. Seeing that all the customers are watching the conversation, the man denies it was him and pretends the woman confused the person. Internally, Kenichi thinks that if he told Azalea it was him, she would empty his pockets before he could receive her. Meanwhile, the musician begins singing about a group of catmen led by the lynx, while the tavern owner reminds Kenichi of the promise he made that they would be lovers when he succeeded in business. And Kenichi is perplexed by the woman's intuition working at full throttle, as he never said anything about having earned any money, so he argues that he never made such a promise. In Tia's Faker, the woman shouts that she was just a fling for him, while the customers remind her that she is there to work, as one of them has an empty glass. Meanwhile, Kenichi joins in the fun and simply agrees that he is a no-good adult, heading up to his room and leaving her there. As he climbs the stairs to use his lodging room, the protagonist reflects that it is only a matter of time before the nobles find out about him. In the middle of the night, while Kenichi sleeps, a girl passes by the lynx without issue and walks down the hallway to the room. When Kenichi sees Azalea's face under his blanket, he complains that he is too tired for such things. But the woman just asks to press play as it's time for fun. However, they realize that someone has invaded the room, and we see that who arrived there is Anemone with the lynx. And well, the protagonist was saved by the bell, and who ended up sleeping with him was Anemone and the lynx. The next day, Kenichi thinks Anama might be worried about the child, so he goes to the market to look for her. But the woman is not there. The catmen are hungover and have no idea where the merchant might be, so Kenichi decides to take care of some tasks, like selling equipment taken from the bandits, which earns him 32 gold coins. He then sells Shaga's items to the Malo company for 35 coins, and later, after selling furniture and bows at the old man's tool shop, he earns another 22 gold coins. In total, this earns him 17,800,000 yen. Divided among the 7 members of the expedition team, each receives 12 coins. Kenichi decides to give a portion to Anama and the women who chose to stay in Dahlia. After dining with the catmen, Kenichi takes Anemone back to her home, along with the lynx, where Anama is extremely worried. Later, while having tea, the little girl confesses that she wants to stay with Kenichi. Unfortunately, Anama suggests that she could teach the girl how to run a business so she wouldn't feel alone, as they would live together. But the little girl insists that she wants to live with the man. In the late afternoon, Anama departs in a carriage to the city, and Kenichi has serious doubts about whether this will work out. On the way back home, he asks Anemone why she wants to live with him, and she replies that it's because he feeds her until she is satisfied, something she had mentioned at the end of the first episode. Accepting this, Kenichi serves dinner and enchants the girl with a delicious meal, making him happy to see her appreciate his food. Later, Kenichi is about to take a bath, and the little girl insists that she wants to bathe too, while at bedtime, the child wants to sleep next to him. Kenichi then realizes that suddenly he now has an adoptive daughter, but even though things are going from 0 to 100 very quickly, he decides to just go with the flow. But folks, red flag for trouble, as while father and daughter sleep, a group of hooded figures approaches the backyard of the house. In the next scene, Kenichi has a brief nightmare about his exhausting office days and his past life, waking up gasping in his bed. 15 days later, the knight Norspal is awarded the title of Baron for defeating Shaga, taking over a small territory and starting to recruit people to live there, as well as looking for a wife. Meanwhile, some townspeople have their noble titles revoked for having hired Shaga to kidnap Primula. Ironically, while walking through the city, Anemone sees a dressina being used by a resident, and Kenichi remembers how the Mallows laughed at him when he first presented the project. But the clever ones ended up using the idea. They even apologized for laughing at the foreigner and paid him 5 gold coins for the idea, as, according to Mallow, one of the company's mottos is always to show gratitude for an idea. After the meeting, as they leave the company, the hooded figures continue to follow Kenichi and Anemone. When the review is completed, the group collects the reward and divides it equally once again. Kenichi returns the money he borrowed from Mallow to prepare for the mission, and then distributes a portion among the women he rescued. As for Anama, she accepts at least 1 gold coin, and even gives a fruit as a gift to Anemone. Wherever he goes, Kenichi feels he is being followed, and this becomes even more evident when he notices a hooded man right behind him. Realizing this, he grabs Anemone by the arm and runs, but the hooded figures manage to corner them. The guys have completely lost their shame and are attacking in public, damn it. And with no safe place to go, Kenichi risks an alley and throws wooden boxes along the way to try to buy time. However, at a certain point in the journey, a carriage blocks the alley's exit, leaving him with no way out, so he surrenders. The hooded figures open the carriage door and inform him that their employer wants to have a chat with the merchant. But before entering the vehicle, Kenichi summons some small bombs from his inventory and throws them around, even inside the carriage. Amid the chaos, he manages to create distance and aims his crossbow at the pursuers, who flee in panic. At that moment, Mallow arrives by carriage and asks what happened. Kenichi enters with his adoptive daughter and explains that the whole situation must be the work of some noble, and Mallow believes it was the anti-monarchist faction, suggesting that Kenichi visit Lord Asclepius. But he is still not comfortable with this situation and thinks only that, well, it's time to hit the road. At night, as the foreign merchant heads home, Mallow talks to his daughter about the great debt they owed Kenichi, as they were honored by the city lord for having invented the dressina, even gaining an honorary surname for this achievement. For example, Primula is now called Primula ne Dressina. The next day, alone in her room, she remembers that at first, she only saw Kenichi as a boring middle-aged man, but soon recognized his great talent and personality. Because of this, Primula did everything to get this man's attention, but nothing worked. Still, because he went to save her from the bandits, she was sure he felt something for her, and so she decided to invest even more in Kenichi, as she is certain he feels something for her. Excited, she mentions that she will accompany him in life, and with that runs to his house to open her heart. But upon arriving there, the blow was strong, leaving her only to cry upon seeing that his house simply disappeared. At this, she remembers Anama's words about Kenichi being someone who doesn't settle down because of a woman. The scene then changes, and we see that Kenichi, Anemone, and the Lynx are on a motorcycle wandering around, and on the way, he meets Fuyu, and the two then have a chat. Fuyu asks who the girl and the Lynx are, and our protagonist just mentally notes how he left home storing everything, questioning if Anemone wanted to come along or stay with Anima, and she confirming that she wants to go with him. Before leaving, the Lynx shows up there, and he says goodbye. But to his surprise, the Lynx followed him and decided to stay with him too. Reflecting on all this, the protagonist just mentioned to Fuyu that they are his family, leaving both Anemone and the Lynx happy with the statement. He then tells Fuyu that he is embarking on a journey with no set destination with his family in search of the long-dreamed-of peaceful life. Seeking to settle in a new location, the group takes a break to eat, and Kenichi prepares a freshly caught fish for the meal. At the moment, they are 100 kilometers from Dahlia and about 6 kilometers from the next town called Astrantia. After finishing the fishbowl soup, the man serves his family and thinks to himself that this is indeed the life he has always wanted. During lunch, in a moment of reflection, Kenichi remembers that Anemone mentioned being 12 years old, but she seems very small for her age. After eating, he launches a drone and discovers that the river where they stopped flows into a lake, and it seems that Astrantia lies beyond that lake, so he invites the girl to look for a spot with a good view there. Upon arriving, the child and the Lynx have fun in the water, and while they play, Anemone remembers that she always prayed to God to save her. She recalls that throughout her difficult journey, she even shed some tears. After all, she is just a child. However, now she is on a new adventure with Kenichi, whom she mentions as her god and savior. After a great trip to the lake, Kenichi asks Anemone what she thinks about living there, and the girl gets excited about the idea. Thus, he conjures his wooden house once again and prepares for a new life. Watching the child lovingly hug the Lynx, Our protagonist realizes that he never gave the feline a name and suggests names like Kuro, Black, Kuru, and several others, but none please. Thinking better, he considers the animal's fur and decides on Velvet, which could be affectionately called Vel, and both like the suggestion very much. At night, the child writes her own name without needing help, and Kenichi celebrates her progress in reading and writing. Thus, he checks and discovers that the Shangri-La store doesn't sell diesel, so he uses kerosene for now. But he would love to find a cheaper fuel. And since he once saw on TV something about biodiesel made from used cooking oil, he buys some books to study the subject. Lying in his bed, researching the method, Kenichi sees Anemone enter his room and take an interest in the reading, even without understanding. Kenichi explains that the book is not in the language of this country, which means the girl couldn't read it. But she says she could learn the language spoken in the man's country. With that, Kenichi buys a copy of The Little Mermaid and allows the girl to learn some Japanese words on her own. The next day, while removing the camouflage from his solar panel since it was sunny, Kenichi hears a noise in the bushes and, fearing it might be a monster, quickly buys a crossbow to deal with the situation. However, Miley emerges from the bushes with a bow on her back and shouts that she has finally found her friend. She complains about being left behind and having had a hard time following the trail of the lynx in the cart. Then Miley enters the wooden house and Anemone is happy to see her friend. And well, Kenichi informs her that the Catwoman will live with them from now on. At lunch, Kenichi asks if Dahlia is still the same since he left, and the Catwoman says that Norseball proposed to Primula, while Kenichi thinks that this is a typical status marriage, but admits that he would have liked to attend the ceremony. Later, the residents of the house take a bath to clean up and relax, and Miley discovers the wonders of a hairdryer, which, in her case, works for her entire body. The next day, she and Anemone are looking at the book The Little Mermaid, and the cat finds the illustrations very explanatory, mentioning that she can understand even without knowing how to read. Hearing the conversation, Kenichi realizes that even without knowing how to read, if it's an illustrated book, people can understand the story. So, he thinks it might be a good idea to produce illustrated books about fairy tales from his world, but first decides to ask the girls if there are any in their world. Immediately, Miley mentions the Ancient Queen and the Holy Knight, for example. Anemone adds the tale of the forest elf, and Kenichi shows more interest in the latter, so he asks the little girl to tell the story so he can write it down. Anemone tells the story of an elf who lived in a forest and fell in love with a human prince. But all the people from both races were against this union, and the elf almost dies in a conflict that starts because of this. However, thanks to the power of the fairies, she escapes to a safe place, and the two live happily ever after deep in the forest. After writing down each part of the story, Kenichi buys a mimeograph printing kit and puts his plan into action to create books based on local tales, leaving Anemone and Miley amazed to see before them a finished book with a story they've heard all their lives, something completely new for both. Suddenly, Kenichi notices a canoe approaching the riverbank with a human and a beastman inside. Quickly, he tells the girls to go inside the house as there are people approaching, and it's unknown if they pose any threat. To defend his territory, Kenichi approaches the intruders with his crossbow in hand, but the man in the canoe explains that they are residents of Santanka, the village on the other side of the lake. Kenichi asks if there is any law preventing him from living there or something like that, and the man replies that living there isn't a problem, as long as the person is good. But since they don't know if he is a bandit or something, they came to check. Additionally, he observes that the intruder seems well armed, so Kenichi explains that he is a merchant who had trouble in his city and needed to flee. At that moment, Velvet comes to caress his owner, and the Beastman is surprised to see such a large lynx so comfortable with a human, which means it's impossible for him to be a bad person. Thus, the human in the canoe trusts his companion's word, and introduces himself as Crouton, while the Beastman is called Nyanyas. Then, Kenichi takes the two to the backyard of his house, where Crouton says that since he has worked for the kingdom of Astrantia, he ends up taking care of these matters. Nyanyas sees the girls inside the house and comments to his partner that there don't seem to be any problems around here, so the human agrees and apologizes for the inconvenience. Putting that aside, he sees the books produced by Kenichi and asks if they are for sale. Later, during a meal, Miley asks if the homeowner has already sold his books, and he replies that Crouton has a daughter Anemone's age. After the meal, while Anemone stays home reading, Kenichi goes into the forest and stores medicinal plants in his inventory. Miley arrives and hugs the man from behind, whispering that Anemone isn't around. The human asks if she's in heat or something for acting this way, but she replies that it's not about that. And well, the scene changes, and in the following days, Kenichi builds an external shed and begins synthesizing biodiesel inside. Wearing his hazardous materials protective suit, he feels so hot that he occasionally needs to throw everything off and jump into the lake to cool down. It was dangerous work involving a deadly toxin. But if successful, Kenichi could create a much cheaper fuel. On one hand, expectations were high, and he was very focused on this, but on the other hand, there's a side effect. Anemone is feeling a bit neglected and bored. Kenichi then decides to break the ice and approaches the child, inviting her to make a new illustrated book. Without a response, he mentions that he is thinking of going to Astrantia and invites her. At that moment, Miley appears and accepts the invitation even though she wasn't invited. So Anemone decides to join. Since Miley has been to this city many times, she would be responsible for showing the way, while Kenichi and Anemone ride the motorcycle. Since they couldn't take the direct road, they had to make a 10-kilometer detour. Upon arriving, Kenichi goes to the local adventurers guild and informs them that he wants to register with the guild. The woman asks for identification, so he shows the item that proves he is registered with the merchants guild and the adventurers guild in Dahlia. Miley, also wanting to register there, says she is only registered with the Adventurers Guild in Dahlia. After evaluating the man's identification, the receptionist apologizes upon discovering that she is speaking to Kenichi, the one who defeated the feared Shaga, but he asks the woman not to speak loudly to maintain his privacy. In the middle of this, Anemone shouts that Kenichi is the strongest god there is, leaving the man even more embarrassed. In any case, the receptionist says that the cost to register with the guild is 1 silver coin. After registering, the group goes to Astrantia street market to grab a bite, and Kenichi reflects that in this world, it's common to just boil vegetables and meats and put them in soup without a base broth, so he understands why Anemone and Miley are making such faces. As he realizes that after eating seasoned food, it's hard to go back to this type of meal. Knowing this, he buys a bonito fish broth for the two to remind them what real food tastes like. In the middle of this, he notices 2 suspicious men looking for someone while Crouton enters a dark alley with his daughter. Putting that aside for a moment, he continues his stroll through the market with the girls until they find a tool shop called Snowflake. Miley mentions that it belongs to an old mage, and sensing the smell of treasures, the man decides to enter. Inside, the mage is at the counter and welcomes the customers while commenting that she has never seen him around before. Realizing this, he almost calls her the same again when asking about a tool but corrects himself before repeating the mistake. Then the shopkeeper demonstrates the tool's function by pouring water into one container and wine into another. After a reaction from the tool, the 2 liquids are poured separately into 2 mugs. Kenichi tastes the wine and notices that the alcohol content has strangely increased. After a more detailed inspection, he asks if the tool separates certain substances from what is placed on the front plate. The mage replies that it is a magical item that extracts the liquid placed on the front plate and discards the rest through the bottom. At that moment, Kenichi realizes that he can produce biodiesel without chemicals if he uses this device, so he buys the item for 5 gold coins. Then Anemone appears with a grimoire in her hand, and Kenichi gets excited, asking if it allows one to use magic by reading. Surprised by the man's behavior, the lady explains that this won't be possible for someone without magical power. But Kenichi is willing to take the risk and buys the book for 10 gold coins. He was eager to take it home, but the mage explains that grimoires need to be registered first, so the buyer must return in a week. As they leave the store, they encounter Nyanyas on the way, but the beast is in a hurry and runs off with a bag on his back. With that, Kenichi becomes worried and feels that he should go home as quickly as possible. By the way, in some alley, he sees those 2 suspicious men from the market telling each other that they found who they were looking for. Shortly after, a child screams and Kenichi sees Crouton with his daughter being threatened by armed bandits. Hesitating to get involved for a moment, Kenichi knows he hates getting into trouble, but when Anemone asks if he isn't going to do something, he realizes he has no way out at that moment. So, he asks Miley to take care of the child, but if the situation worsens, she should lend a hand. Thus the man buys a medieval plague doctor mask from the online store and enters the fray. As he approaches the bandits, he uses the item to scare them, claiming to be a magician full of tricks. He grabs the fireworks and starts setting them off around, saying that they will explode inside them if they don't leave, and well, the men flee. After that, Nyanyas arrives and apologizes for only showing up now, explaining that he fell into the bandits' trap and ended up separated from his friend and daughter. Later, Crouton explains that the armed men were from the Spice Union, and Kenichi remembers that this union in Dahlia is called Bacopa. Crouton adds that when he worked for the kingdom, he arrested several of them, which marked him as a target. Then he explains to his daughter that this was the man who sold him the storybook, and the girl thanks him excitedly, having loved the story. Anemone shares that she helped make the book, and asks to create a new story with Crouton's daughter, who shows great interest in doing so. Thus, the two introduce themselves and become friends, something that pleases Kenichi, as it's always good to see a child making their first friend of the same age. A few days later, Anemone eagerly awaits Mary's arrival, who approaches by canoe with her parents and Nyanyas for a visit. Kenichi had prepared a feast for the arrival of the new friends, who are amazed by the spices the foreigner used in his food. Afterward, they spend the whole day having fun, especially the children, until the late afternoon arrives, along with the time to leave. After that, Mary and Anemone start visiting each other every day, and Kenichi also gets to know the village of Santanka, where Crouton's daughter lives with her family. The two start working on an illustrated story of Cinderella until one day something happens. Almost unable to breathe, Crouton arrives at Kenichi's house with a huge bag full of coins, claiming that it's all his savings. According to him, Mary is suffering from a high fever, saying that this is a disease from this region and that when children catch it, they usually don't last even a night. Hearing this, Anemone desperately hugs her father, and Miley remembers that the mage from Astrantia might be able to use some healing spell. Unfortunately, Crouton laments not having the money to request such a service. So first, Kenichi buys medicine to reduce the fever and sends Crouton back to his village with all the money, promising that he will be there soon. With that done, he leaves Miley to take care of Anemone and sets off on his motorcycle. At night, in the village of Santanka, the mage says that Mary has chicory fever, which is very difficult to cure with magic. According to her, a white flower called chicory blooms deep in the forest, at the spring that is the source of the river that passes through the village, and this fever can only be treated with its seeds. Thus, Kenichi, Crouton, and Nyanyas decide to set out in search of the cure, agreeing to return by the next morning at the latest. However, as soon as the men leave, we see that those wretched bandits from the city have found Crouton's house and are lurking around. The group then heads to the destination indicated by the healer in search of a cure for the disease contracted by Mary. Sometime later, they find the spring. Kenichi parks his motorcycle while Nyanyas hears someone approaching. Quickly, Kenichi pulls out his crossbow and aims in the direction of the noise, but it was just our brother Velvet emerging from the bushes. Feeling relieved, the feline's owner pets him for a moment, and then buys an inflatable boat to cross the river. At a certain point during the crossing, he finds the plant mentioned by the healer and pulls one out of the water to give to Crouton, who is immensely grateful for the chance to save his daughter. However, things obviously don't go as planned, as they end up being surrounded by a pack of wolves, and Kenichi believes these beasts are seeking revenge. Our protagonist obviously won't back down, so he summons two swords to give to his companions. He then says he will distract the wolves while Crouton must return immediately to Mary. Both the man and Nyanyas are outraged at the idea of leaving their partner behind, but as Kenichi lights his fireworks, the merchant insists it's the best thing to do. After all, Mary is in a race against time. With no chance to argue, Kenichi immediately throws the fireworks at the wolves to drive them away, and Nyanyas puts Crouton on his back and runs back to the village. The problem is that some wolves chase them and surround them, making Kenichi think that Crouton is the target for some reason. Meanwhile, the henchmen who were after Crouton hide in the forest and swear to make the man pay for what he did, while a dogman seems to control the wolves with a flute. In the midst of the conflict, Nyanyas and his partner are violently attacked but defend themselves with the swords, frustrating the bandits who expected an easy victory. To make matters worse for them, Velvet charges and knocks down the two men, then climbs the tree where the dogman is and takes his flute. The episode isn't even over yet, and it's already clear that our dear Velvet is the MVP of the game. Due to the change in the wolves' behavior, Kenichi realizes that the dog controlled the pack with his instrument, so he orders Nyanyas to take Crouton away as quickly as possible. The dogman manages to free himself from Velvet and regains control of the wolves, but Kenichi believes a catman running at full speed will leave the wolves behind. However, for some reason, the black wolves stop obeying the bandits' commands. At that moment, footsteps so heavy that shook the ground across the territory could be heard as a colossal monster approaches, causing the wolves to soil their fur in fear and run away. Without delay, the bear-like creature quickly approached and delivered a powerful blow to the dogman, leaving him smashed on the ground. At this, the two cowards fled, and the colossal beast turned its attention to Kenichi and Velvet, who were facing the bear. Seeing the creature running towards him despite being terrified, Kenichi manages to summon the beast and shoots it in the eye. Velvet takes the opportunity to attack next and manages to deal some damage, and his above-average agility allows the lynx to escape unscathed from this attack. Relieved, Kenichi now throws a large number of rockets at the bear, which, probably out of instinct, decides to shove the things into its mouth, which consequently explode in its mouth, leaving Kenichi and me simply stunned to witness this unexpected scene. Thus, he summons his backhoe, spins 360 degrees, hitting it with the bucket, and ends the conflict. After confirming the victory, the human heads straight to the fallen dogman. Later, he arrives by motorcycle at Crouton's house, where Mary is still lying in bed. However, the healer claims that the worst is over. The child's father thanks his friend again, as does the mother, not being the type who is used to this kind of attention. Kenichi isn't sure what to say, so he decides to talk to Crouton outside the house. There, he shares that he made a deal with a dog man from the forest. Previously having saved the citizen, Kenichi asked him to promise never to hurt Crouton's family again. The dog swore never to repeat such an act, but reminds him that he can't be responsible for others, as many people hold a grudge against the man from the village of Santanka. Because of this, the bandit advises that the man should leave for good. And this was the issue Kenichi brought to Crouton, believing that leaving Santanka could save his family. The problem is that he has nowhere to go, since even moving to Dahlia is out of the question, considering that Zureta is linked to Bacopa from that city. Thus, Kenichi remembers that Baron Norspal, who recently took over a territory near Dahlia, is in need of people to work on his lands. With a recommendation from Kenichi, a personal friend, Norspal would certainly be happy to welcome the new worker. Therefore, Crouton feels grateful but would like to discuss this with his family first. The next day, back at Kenichi's house, Miley climbs on him and complains that he didn't invite her on such a cool adventure. But the man argues that there was no time and someone needed to stay to take care of Anemone. Speaking of the child, she thanks the man for saving her great friend. A few days later, Crouton and Nyanyas, who apparently had nothing to do with the bandits as I thought in the previous episode, leave for Norspal's domain. Still recovering, Mary asks if Anemone finished the illustrated Cinderella book, but her friend insists on doing it only with Mary when she gets better. Since the child is still not healthy, the plan was for the father to go ahead and then return to fetch the family. In the midst of it all, Kenichi and Miley notice the presence of the Scooby-Doo of the deep web around. As Crouton leaves, he remembers how many hold a grudge against that man, but with his claws dripping blood, he assures that no one needs to worry anymore. Miley asks what he means, so Kenichi explains that the dog fulfilled the promise he made to him. The cat makes a face and declares that you can't trust the word of that scruffy creature. But the dog replies that she knows nothing about the loyalty of his people. And with that, he leaves with his belongings. Since he can't stay in Astrantia, he will wander to the sea or wherever fate takes him. Next, Kenichi takes the monster he defeated in the forest to the guild, which recognizes the beast as a tusked bear. Our protagonist wants the man to remove the meat and the magic stone from the bear, as he plans to sell the rest. And given the size of the animal, the citizen warns that he will only finish by the end of the afternoon. So, Kenichi leaves the shop, and since it's not even noon yet, decides to go home to wait. Meanwhile, in a nearby establishment, a hooded woman declares that she is looking for someone. Kenichi, without even hearing the voice of the person who asked, feels such a strong chill that he even thinks he caught a cold. Later, upon arriving home, the man prepares a mixture in the magical instrument, containing alkali and alcohol, along with the esterified vegetable oil in the upper bowl. After that, he adds the biodiesel he made earlier to the front bowl. In his mind, he plans for the biodiesel to accumulate there. Seeing the reaction, Anemone asks if it worked, and the man thinks it did, and to be sure, he takes the fuel outside and pours it into the generator. When the machine works, he celebrates the fact that he only spent 300 yen to produce this instead of the 3,000 he was spending before. After that, he prepares to leave and tells the girls that he might spend the night in the city if he can't sort things out with the bear in time. Upon arriving there, he enters the old mage's shop and accidentally calls her grandma again, but quickly realizes his mistake and corrects himself. The woman hands him the grimoire that was left for registration, and Kenichi notices a stone embedded in it. She explains that it is a magic stone linked to the enchantment recorded in the book, which he needs to learn, otherwise it won't activate. In the late afternoon, the merchant returns to the guy who was handling the bear and receives the separated meat and the magic stone from the tusked bear and is informed that he should collect the payment for the materials he sold at the counter. Without wasting time, Kenichi goes to the receptionist to collect the 4 gold and 2 silver coins she appraised, focusing on what really matters, which is the payment. As soon as Kenichi leaves the guild, a hooded woman sees the man walking down the street, and the proximity of the woman makes Kenichi feel that same chill again. This gives him a bad feeling, and he decides it's better not to spend the night in the city and resolves to go home. In the midst of this mental turmoil, the man is surprised by a feminine touch that grabs his wrist. The mysterious woman sinisterly declares that she has finally found who she was looking for, then reveals herself as Primula. Losing her threatening demeanor and giving way to a sad expression, she hugs him tightly and exclaims that his sudden disappearance was a cruel thing to do. Kenichi argues that it would have caused trouble for the Mallow Company if he had been caught by nobles, but the girl thinks the company knows how to decide for itself whether it's in danger or not. Realizing that the entire crowd is watching this discussion, the man asks that they go to a more private place, so the woman invites him to the hotel where she is staying. There the two sit down and Primula recalls that the Dracena that Kenichi designed was what gave her family a surname. In addition, she lists several things the merchant did for her and her father, and Kenichi can hardly believe he did so much for the Mallows, feeling that he was more of a helper than help. At one point, the woman slams the table and says that's not all. As if that weren't enough, Kenichi saved her life from the dreaded Shaga and his henchmen. Wanting to escape all this attention, Kenichi mentions that he heard Primula was about to marry Baron Norseball and gain status, but she says she refused the proposal. Changing the subject, the woman mentions that both Anima and the owner of the tool shop were angry because Kenichi left without warning, and he admits he felt guilty about it, but remembers that he didn't want to cause trouble. Hearing this, Primula insists that no one would care, so the man interrupts her to say he understands, and that she can go back and tell everyone what happened. However, she says she doesn't want to go back unless it's with him, and if he doesn't want to go back, she won't either. Frustrated, Kenichi is surprised to have been found in Astrantia, and Primula reveals that she checked at the guild if he had registered in another city. After that, she saw his name on the updated information list and hired a carriage to come. And while going from 0 to 100 faster than a rocket, the girl asks him to make her a woman that night, and I'm cringing with secondhand embarrassment narrating something like this, but I swear, that's what was said. Kenichi stammers frantically while trying not to have a stroke, but seeing that the girl won't back down, he invites her to the room where she is staying, bringing a smile to her face. Thus, they go up to the room and our protagonist, probably functioning on autopilot, compliments the beautiful scenery. Primula, fearing that the man might escape, begins to undress quickly. But to be honest, she would prefer to take a bath first. Enchanted by the sight, Kenichi comments that she is beautiful as she is and, embracing her, confesses that he is happy she is there. Hours later, they go to Kenichi's house, but Anemone shows jealousy at Primula's arrival. Similarly, the girl complains that Kenichi left her behind but brought the girl along with him. The man tries to explain that it's a long story and that, for example, Miley found him by scent. Suddenly, the Catwoman hugs the human tightly and says she never lets her prey escape. But Primula pushes the beast woman away, wanting to know how Anemone ended up there. Kenichi argues that she is just a child and couldn't simply be abandoned, so Primula decides to forgive her friend for today, leaving Anemone annoyed. The little girl asks if she is going to live with them, because the house will get very cramped, and the two exchange unfriendly looks. The homeowner announces that Primula really is going to live with them, and Anemone asks her stepfather not to bring more women home. And, thinking that he hesitated in his response, Primula asks if there is anyone else in his life. To make matters worse, the woman realizes that even the lynx was adopted by the guy, but she was left behind, making her feel even more enchanted. At night, Kenichi begins to feel the challenges of having expanded the family, as at bath time, Miley and Anemone raise their hands to volunteer to go in with the man, and Primula does the same. In the end, to solve the problem, he buys another bathtub for the girls to stay in, and after the bath, the girls go to the dryer while he sends in a little drink and thinks that peace around here is unlikely to be an option. The next day, Kenichi goes to test the grimoire that is finally in his hands. As he recites the spell described in the book, he extends his right hand and shouts, "Fireball!" But absolutely nothing happens. Frustrated, he remembers that the mage lady said that reading the book is useless if the person doesn't have magical powers. Since the book was expensive, he asks Primula if it's hard to sell grimoires, and she replies that it's not, because some people collect them even if they can't use magic. In the middle of this conversation, Anemone picks up the book and begins to recite the spell. And with that, a mana aura envelops the child's body and leaves her father speechless. Finally, the girl launches a fireball, which, let's face it, is a huge danger to do inside the house. Seeing a tragedy unfolding, Kenichi quickly buys 3 fire extinguishers and teaches the women how to use them on the spot. They follow the steps by pulling the pin to put out the fire while Anemone watches closely. A few minutes later, the fire is finally controlled and the girl apologizes for what she did. However, instead of a scolding, her adoptive father praises her ability to use magic as incredible. But before the girl could feel happy and relieved about it, she ends up fainting. After some time, she wakes up in bed and eats some food that Kenichi bought, such as canned peaches, which he says will help her recover faster. By the way, Anemone loved the peaches. Miley comments that this is very similar to Rinka, while Primula observes that only nobles have access to this kind of food, since it requires a lot of sugar, a resource monopolized by them. A few days after Anemone's recovery, Kenichi goes to fetch Mary, who had recovered from chicory fever. The family has a barbecue with a mountain of meat from the tusked bear, and the smell of grilled meat creates high expectations even before the food is served. Kenichi, upon taking the first bite of the meat, reflects that eating an animal you hunted yourself is the essence of a peaceful life. Mary, however, comments that the meat is too tough and is scolded by her mother, but Kenichi agrees with the child. Just as Primula doesn't hide that the food has a very strong smell. With so many things going against him, Kenichi decides to act, first tenderizing the meat by pounding it, and to help a bit more, he makes a special secret sauce. This way, everyone enjoys the meat much better, and Kenichi thinks he did nothing more than his special curry recipe, leaving everyone impressed with the quality of the flavor. Next, Mary and Anemone celebrate the completion of the picture book they were making together. Upon seeing the book, all Primula can think is that this product could make good money if commercialized. Suddenly, the girl's mind is flooded with mercantile visions, and all she wants is to do business in Astrantia. Kenichi reflects alone that this woman is truly a merchant and wonders if perhaps he was the one who ignited this flame in her soul. By the way, he asks what else she would sell besides the book, and she mentions that she could sell the pot au feu of meat and the cooked rinka. Mary's mother emphasizes that even in Astrantia, you can't find a soup as delicious as this one. And Kenichi thinks it's because of the addition of his sauce, as he added enough sugar to justify that the sweetness comes from the rinka. At this, Mary's mother asks if Primula will really serve this food in Astrantia, also asking if she could repay everything they did for her, as she feels guilty for not being able to thank Kenichi enough. Referring to Primula as Kenichi's wife, she mentions that it would be the merchant's first time in Astrantia, and having experience as a waitress could help her with that. Kenichi thinks this is asking too much, while Primula only cares at this moment about being called the wife of the man of her dreams. Mary also offers to help, claiming she is almost of working age, so Anemone decides to help as well, not wanting to be away from her father. The next day, our protagonist takes Primula to do business in Astrantia. Upon arriving, the first thing he does is buy a cart for the vendors to start their work and sell the food in the middle of the city. In no time, people line up to try the dish, as only nobles have access to this kind of food, and now the commoners are delighting in this wonder. However, as in every place in this wide world, there are always those who are absolutely worthless, and things start to go wrong at a certain point for them, as 2 men complain that there was a fly in the soup. Primula defends herself, arguing that they take great care to avoid this, but the customers don't accept the mere suggestion that they themselves put the insect in the bowl. Amid this tense atmosphere, Kenichi pilots a drone to the top of the cliff, which was completely unexplored, and observes that surely many medicinal herbs and vegetables could be found there. Behind him, with binoculars, Anemone comments that there are many beautiful shiny stones there, while Kenichi confesses that he has never seen a pink mineral like that, and can't help but feel that a resource like that must be worth a fortune. Then, the afternoon arrives, and Kenichi goes to fetch Primula, who happily and excitedly reports that they sold all the food and the books. Hearing this, Kenichi thinks to himself that this girl has a talent for this kind of thing that he can barely imagine. Next to his friends, he notices that there is a beast woman. So he asks who she is, and Primula explains that it's a complicated story. She then tells him that there was a scuffle with some despicable guys, and at the moment when everything seemed like it would fall apart, this beast woman appeared and told them that the men had put the insect in the food and ordered them to empty their pockets if they wanted to prove her wrong. Instead, the two fools ran away and the problem was elegantly resolved by her. Because of this, Primula hired her as a bodyguard and she seems grateful, as she earns a silver coin just to keep troublemakers away from time to time, and it's really hard to find work around here. At this moment, she introduces herself as Nyamena, and Kenichi asks her to take good care of his friends. When they arrive home at night, Miley asks who this new woman entering her territory is. Kenichi explains that Primula invited the new bodyguard to dinner, so the cat feels relieved as she thought the protagonist had found another woman again. Velvet approaches his owner with sadness and nuzzles him, making the man return the affectionate gesture. Noticing the presence of a large lynx, Nyamena bows before the sacred animal. At dinner time, the beast woman falls in love with the bear meat stew, but admits it would be perfect with a bit of wine. Luckily, the host makes a bottle appear and serves it to his guest, who happily drinks a glass, having never tasted such delicious wine. Kenichi thinks that was the cheapest one from Shangri-La, but he decides to ignore that. Soon, while Nyamena thinks she's in paradise, Kenichi offers her a bath, and Anemone quickly offers to heat the water. As they go outside, we see that the task is accomplished using fireball spells that instantly heat the bath water. Nyamena doesn't waste time and runs to the water, while the man of the house asks if there's any problem with casting these spells in succession. Primula explains that the more you use magic, the more you refine your ability, which surprises him. At this, the girls enjoy the bath, while Nyamena feels like a noble woman for enjoying such a delightful bath. After the bath, all the women dry off, and the guest has the audacity to lie down on a bed and declare that she's going to live there. Miley loses her patience and makes it clear that there's no room for one more, leading to a heated argument. However, they soon turn their attention to Kenichi, who is teaching Anemone to read, write, and do math. He believes that the options for women are limited around here, so it would be good to expand Anemone's chances. Nyamena agrees, adding that women without proper education often end up selling their bodies, until Kenichi suggests bringing Mary to learn something about business from Primula. Anemone confesses that she would prefer to learn more about magic to go on adventures with her father and slay some dragons, but Kenichi dampens her adventurous spirit by revealing that all he wants is peace and quiet. In other words, tranquility. The next day, after Nyamena spends the night, Primula reopens her stall in Astrantia and continues to do well, now under the protection of the Beast Woman. As for Mary, she and her mother receive a letter from Crouton at home, while Kenichi enlists the help of Miley and Anemone to finish building a scaffold to climb the cliff. In the late afternoon, Primula arrives at the scaffold construction and asks Kenichi something she has always wanted to know, namely his item box, claiming that he has many things in there. He confirms that yes, but says he can't show everything inside to anyone, not even her, Anemone, or anyone else, saying that everyone has one or two secrets, just as surely Primula herself hides things within her that Kenichi has no idea about. That said, the man questions if the woman has lost trust in him or something and kisses her. After the kiss, he makes it clear that this is the girl's chance to return to Dahlia if she prefers, but she insists that she doesn't want to leave. Looking irritated, Nyamena asks the couple not to get too excited in front of her or she might get tempted. Then Kenichi asks if she doesn't have anyone, even though she's so beautiful. With an even darker expression, she replies that she doesn't want to have anything to do with useless men. And interrupting their interaction, Miley and Anemone shout from home that they're hungry. The next morning, Kenichi is cutting the grass in the yard with his modern tool. And Primula takes a day off because the man said he would climb the cliff. He asks the two beast women to fetch Mary and her mother, which puts Anemone in a great mood. The two children play near the beautiful lake and can see the village from afar. And once at the top of the cliff, each person seems to be in search of something different. Nyamena shows her friends a handful of scattered mushrooms, which are delicious. Miley, on the other hand, spots a different bird flying in the sky and promises to bring her bow next time. Anemone and Mary find some red and blue flowers. Meanwhile, Kenichi is there for the pink mineral he spotted the other day, and with the help of a rock hammer, he manages to extract a stone of this resource to store in the item box and evaluate. This mineral is called Rodam, and a stone of this size is worth about 200,000 yen, which means that just this stone already pays for the value of the rock hammer he invested in. Therefore, as he collects more and more stones of this mineral, the merchant celebrates that he will fill his pockets with cash. At the end of the day, he puts the raw meat in milk to marinate and remove the smell, in addition to preparing chard with the scattered mushrooms that Nyamena found. And according to him, the name of this recipe is gyoza. After the preparation period, it's time to serve the meal at the table, and everyone present gathers to share the dish. Everyone there is simply enchanted by the unique flavor of that recipe. And I confess it made me crave it too, just as they praised the taste of the mayonnaise. By the way, Nyamena comments that it was a mage from the Empire who created this mayonnaise with magic. Kenichi reflects that he knows well that it's the same guy who introduced the concept of double entry accounting, the water pump, and apparently this mayonnaise as well. By the way, Primula asks if Kenichi also used magic to create this sauce, and he shares that no, mentioning that he only used egg, vinegar, and oil. Realizing that this would sell like water in the desert, Primula runs to write down the recipe, but the cook would love to eat in peace before anything else. Upon tasting another piece of the food, he evaluates that it really needs chard and a gyoza, that the bear meat doesn't harm the flavor, and that the mushroom adds an interesting touch to the taste. Soon he notes that it would be great in a soup if he used thicker dough, and Primula confesses that she would love to sell this recipe at her stall. The man remembers that this would be a lot of work, but the merchant is willing to hire people to do the job because one of the secrets of the Mallow Company to make a profit is to seek people to help, but not forget to give them proper payment. At night, Kenichi gathers the girls to show his own fireball trick by pouring brandy on the lit grill, causing a burst of flames. A few minutes later, the bear steaks he was grilling for the barbecue were ready. When Nyamena tastes this delicacy, she becomes obsessively in love with the meat and asks about the aroma emanating from it. Our protagonist explains that it's the smell of the brandy he used to marinate the meat and mask its strong smell. Hearing this, she hugs her boss and confesses that she has a request to make, while Miley and Primula watch the scene with visible envy, and all she wants is to take a sip of that brandy. The scene evolves and we see that he is serving brandy to her, who apparently appreciates a good drink. He advises her to take it easy since it's a strong drink, but as soon as she smells the alcohol, she can't resist and drinks the whole glass, almost letting her soul escape through her mouth from the heat of the drink, but showing much appreciation. Happy with the free drink, Nyamena quickly becomes loud and hugs the homeowner again, declaring that she will never return to the city. That is until Miley pulls her hair to keep her away from her master, but Nyamena shamelessly asks to live there after all. They eat and drink the best there. Miley shouts that this won't happen, but Kenichi and Primula like the idea, considering the bodyguard is quite honest. Primula, in particular, is relieved that she is only interested in food and drink, and not in men. And I don't know if it's true, but we move on. In a time skip, we see that a month later, Primula's stall has expanded to the point of hiring new employees and was renamed Corolla Restaurant. One of the new employees introduces herself to our protagonist as Iris, thinking that our protagonist is Primula's father, but she corrects the girl and says that he is her husband, leaving the girl somewhat embarrassed. According to what Kenichi heard, Primula taught Iris to cook and manage the business to open other branches of the restaurant. At night, the businesswoman reveals that having branches will allow her to have more time to pursue her husband if necessary. Over the days, as Primula continued to profit from her venture, our protagonist profited from mineral extraction. Meanwhile, Anemone worked collecting medicinal herbs from the forest on top of the cliff, while Miley and Nyamena hunted animals around there. The Corolla restaurant then evolved, and it became necessary to rent a warehouse to prepare the products, and it started earning about 200,000 yen per day, with the goal of reaching 70 million per year. And with this money, she opened 2 more branches and raised the profit expectation to 200 million per year. Kenichi reflects that all this happened thanks to the sauce that Kenichi buys from Shangri-La, as the food at Corolla stands out from the rest, giving them a significant advantage. At this, the scene changes, and in a castle, a girl named Lilith is informed by her mother that the bandits near Dahlia were defeated by a mage who summons iron beasts. She mentions that it seems this mage is living in the outskirts of Astrantia, and according to her, this is a clear sign that their path is being guided by the spirits. We see then that a woman is talking to Primula. Her name is Kanan, and she is the official wife of Viscount Eupatorium, and I only focused on the word official But let's move on. She asks if she is the daughter of that Malo guy, who is also known as the greatest merchant of Dahlia and the inventor of the Dracena. And in this way, the conversation continues. Parallel to this chat, we see that Kenichi went after another grimoire and ended up taking one with explosion magic, as he remembered that the old merchant from a few episodes ago possessed this magic, and he thought it was cool. While Kenichi is focused on the grimoire, Anemone is there reading a book related to domestic magic. And as the old lady noticed that the little girl was engrossed in the reading, she mentioned that she would give it to her as a gift, mentioning that since it's domestic magic, it doesn't need to be registered. The scene changes, and night has fallen, where we see Kenichi talking to Primula, who mentioned that the Viscount's wife wants a brooch, as during a certain trip to Dahlia, another noblewoman was boasting about one she bought from the Malo company. And Kenichi just realizes that what's happening is that ego competition that occurs between people. At this point, our protagonist appeals to Shangri-La and provides a very beautiful brooch for Primula. And the girl, upon noticing the face carved into the stone, mentions that the figure strongly resembles the Viscount's wife, and Kenichi tells her to say it was made especially for her, even to squeeze out some extra cash. Primula keeps staring at the stone, and Kenichi thinks about that suspicious expression she's been making lately. Besides her, we see that Nyamena also carries a strange expression, which was noticed by Miley. The scene changes, and in the morning, Miley invites Kenichi to a dungeon, and our protagonist boils with joy at this invitation. However, he questions why she didn't mention it yesterday, and she replies that she couldn't, because otherwise Nyamena would want to come along, and Kenichi just tells her to try to get along. Anemone, upon hearing that they are going to a dungeon, says she wants to come along as she really wants to go on an adventure, and our protagonist ends up giving in to her insistence, and with the company of Velvet who tags along, they head to the dungeon. Upon arriving, we see that both the girl and the Catwoman are enchanted by the cave, and as they advance, our protagonist finds some green crystals there, and since Kenichi is a firm believer that anything shiny might be worth gold, he immediately summons his energy generator and the hammer to extract that thing and stuff it into his item box for evaluation. However, the hammer makes a deafening noise there. After all, they are in a cave, and Kenichi asks Miley to take Anemone away. But before he can continue, the Catwoman tells our protagonist that something is coming, probably attracted by the noise. Then the monster arrives and reveals itself to be a terrifying cave spider, while Kenichi and Miley already arm themselves with crossbows. Kenichi shoots an arrow, and nothing happens. Miley also shoots, and by hitting the eye, we see that the spider was affected. Kenichi then orders Anemone to aim at its eyes and shoot a fireball. But when he looks at the girl, well, she's completely out of combat because she's too nervous, just like any child would be in a moment like this. The spider then shoots a web at Anemone, and the Catwoman saves her at the last second, and Kenichi, to buy time, summons his rockets and throws them at it. And with this opening, they run away at full speed. Outside, our protagonist mentions that it didn't come after them, and Miley says it only didn't come because they only hunt at night. At this point, Kenichi then goes to Anemone and mentions that maybe it's too early for this type of adventure, and the little girl, scared out of her wits, just apologizes, and our protagonist hugs her and says, "It's okay," and she doesn't need to worry about it. After all, it was her first time seeing a monstrosity like that, so it was natural for her to have this kind of reaction. The scene then changes, and during the night they talk about the dungeon, and Nyamena freaks out about the fact that they didn't call her for something fun like that, while Miley mentions that the adventure wasn't her thing, and they exchange some harsh looks. Kenichi then asks the two to calm down a bit, saying that he will need to go back there to recover the generator that was left behind, as well as the crystals he's drooling to extract. Nyamena then determines that she will come along, and Kenichi asks her not to get too excited, as she needs to be Primula's bodyguard, but the woman with that strange expression just says it's fine, and that she will take a break for a few days. Kenichi finds this behavior strange and asks if something is worrying her, and she doesn't reveal anything. Nyamena then mentions that tomorrow is Spider Beating Day, and that will help her get rid of her irritation, and Kenichi, just like me, also wondered what irritation she is referring to. While the girls are bickering, Kenichi called Anemone and mentioned that they finished registering the grimoire, and because of that, he went to fetch it. At this point, he gives it to the girl, who takes the book and all excited starts reading, but at the first words, our protagonist interrupts her because he doesn't want their house to turn to dust, asking her to do it at another time. Nyamena then approaches Anemone and tells her to relax, as she will teach her to be a top adventurer, asking her to meet her that night. In another scene change, we see that our protagonists are in front of the cave, and Kenichi asks if Anemone is okay and she says yes. After that, Nyamena says that's the spirit, as women need to be strong, while Kenichi just mentally notes that he's curious to know what the tiger woman taught the little girl the previous night. They then advance and reach the place where the crystal hammer and generator are, and Kenichi explains to Nyamena that the spider appeared when he started using that thing. Kenichi then turns on that contraption and almost deafens everyone, and it's obvious that the spider would come again. The spider then appears, and Kenichi summoned the poisons for them to proceed as planned, and we see that the spider felt the effects. At this moment, Kenichi asks if Anemone is firm in her purpose, and she, summoning her magic, affirms that she is. At this moment, she shoots her fireball at the spider, which, showing that it is affected by the burns, retreats. Everyone then celebrates with Anemone, mentioning that she was amazing, and after the battle, they decide to go after the spider, as Kenichi can't rest easy thinking about that thing wandering around. As they advance, they reach a very open place and find the spider all burned up, at which point they shoot the insecticides but notice that a stone moved in the sequence. But no, it wasn't a stone, it was another spider. And this time, according to Nyamena, it was a female, and by its size, to me, it's more like a demon than a spider. Crazy. At this moment, they decide that the best thing is to retreat, even to avoid being taken down by the spider, but it didn't go very well as it went to the exit and blocked it. Velvet then, with incredible agility, ran and kicked the spider in the eye, and the other members of the group, inspired by the lynx's courage, also attack. Anemone then shoots another fireball at this new adversary, but Kenichi realizes that it didn't work, and that maybe it has magic resistance. Kenichi questions why this spider, even though apparently unaffected, simply doesn't attack them, and Nyamena mentions that maybe it's trying to take them down with it by blocking the passage. As the fight progresses, Kenichi stores the male spider in his inventory, which probably totaled the Corsa, and in parallel they continue fighting the female, and our heroes begin to realize that they might start having problems due to the enormous amount of poison expelled in the environment. Kenichi then starts to get nervous and says that he will remove the spider from there even if it's by force, and at this point the crazy guy summons a gigantic hydraulic excavator. Our protagonist imagines that the spider is already weak and delivers a blow with the bucket, but the spider shows that it wasn't weak at all and grabs them. And from there, my friends, the mess was insane. Kenichi forced it and made the spider fall, at which point he hits it with the bucket and thinks he defeated it. But the spider managed to reverse the situation and positioned itself above them, and as a last resort, Anemone begins to utter her new spell and sent the blow at the spider, which went flying. At this moment, the excavator's engine, which had stopped, started working again, and I thought the spider was done for, but no, because it was still alive. Kenichi then advances at full speed and runs over the spider, and this time we see that he managed to pierce it and thus defeat it. He then stores the excavator and the giant spider, and while lamenting the fortune he spent on the excavator, he begins to collect the crystals from the cave, and upon collecting the first one, he is already surprised, as with just that one, he has already recovered more than 2 million yen. Upon leaving the cave, Kenichi asked Anemone since when she can use the explosion spell, and the girl said that it's since now, as it was the first time she tried to use it, which leaves Kenichi surprised and Nyamena happy. They then return home at dusk, and Kenichi almost gives Primula a heart attack by taking the giant spider out of his inventory. And it is at this moment that I could truly grasp the size of that beast when I compared it to the house. Inside the house, Kenichi placed something on the table, and Primula asked what it was, and he replied that it was the cave spider's egg. She asks if he intends to eat it, and he says yes, while the girls make a disgusted face imagining the taste of that thing. Kenichi then sticks the knife into the egg and says he will make a steamed egg cream, mentally noting that in Hokkaido, his hometown, they use sugar in the preparation, meaning the thing is sweet. Kenichi just expresses that he won't force anyone to eat it. But Anemone, being loyal to her father, decides to give it a chance and says it's very tasty. All the others, encouraged by the girl, decide to try it too and fall in love with the taste and softness of the food. In the middle of the conversation, they start talking about cheese, and Primula mentions that it's something very expensive to buy, while Kenichi points out that it's easy to make, and she, looking seriously at him, mentions that she wants to try making it. Kenichi then provides the ingredients, and with a little milk and rinka vinegar, they manage to produce cottage cheese. Everyone is eating the cheese and savoring it, while Nyamina asks if our protagonist is a sage or a god for being able to make such delicious things, while Anemone replies that she knew our protagonist was a god since the day she met him. Kenichi asks why on earth she thinks he's a god, and she explains that she prayed every day to be able to eat until her belly was full, and well, she can now, meaning signs. Primula then mentions to Kenichi that she has a request, saying that she would like to teach the Viscount's wife how to make the cheese. He replies that if possible, he prefers not to get involved with the nobles, and she says she understands that. He then asks why she still wants this, and Nyamina joins the conversation, saying that the main restaurant and the branches of Corolla are facing harassment. Nyamina then explains to us that a scoundrel named Thogalum sent some guys to cause trouble at the restaurant, even questioning the spices they buy, which don't go through Zutara, which is probably the Bacopa of this place, that crap that holds the monopoly on spices. At this moment, Kenichi realizes what Primula is trying to do. She is trying to somehow receive aid from the nobility to take down Thogalum. Kenichi then mentions that she doesn't need the help of the nobles, mentioning that he can use his summoned beasts against him. And both Nyamena and Mayali are on our protagonist's side in this, as well as Anemone and Velvet. But Primula asks them to calm down, and Kenichi imagines that she is trying to avoid a fight. She replies that it's not quite that, and that she will probably ask for his help at some point, but merchants have their own way of fighting. And Kenichi then gives in and says she can do it the way she thinks is best, and makes himself available in case she needs it. She says she thanks him for that, and also promises that she won't reveal how she learned the cheese recipe. At this moment, the scene changes, and we see that Thogalum received a message from the Viscountess, mentioning that anyone caught harassing the Corolla restaurants will be severely punished. The guy gets irritated by the notice and acknowledges that Primula made a great move, and he wonders how much she knows, mentioning that it doesn't matter, and that it's just a matter of time. What he's talking about, I don't know, but what I do know is that the scene changes, and we see that Corolla can reopen until one day we see that the Viscountess went to Kenichi and Primula. Kenichi tries to express who he is, but she cuts him off, mentioning that she has already heard of him through rumors. As the scene progresses and they are seated, she asks if he is the mage who suddenly appeared in Dahlia and took down Shaga, and Kenichi mentions that he has no idea who that person is. But the Viscountess says that the investigation has already been done, and it's no use denying it. Kenichi just sighs because he understood that things went south, so he asks what brought her there, and Kenichi, upon seeing her lower her head, already thinks that something is wrong and that he is fully convinced that this isn't going to end well. The narrative continues, and we see that each lord works together to build a canal through the kingdom. But the part that falls under Eupatorium's responsibility is significantly behind schedule. One of the meeting members mentions that if the project is not completed soon, its funding will be cut, and their lands might even be seized. The remaining section of the canal that needs to be built is 15 kilometers long, and he needs to finish it within a month, which is why his wife pleads with Kenichi to help her. She was willing to give him any reward he desired, including her body, but Kenichi says he is not interested in that. Eupatorium is disappointed at being rejected, but still has one more thing to offer. She tells Kenichi that she can give him a special grimoire as a reward, something called High Protection. Kenichi has no idea what that is, but Nyamena has heard of it, and explains that it is an extremely powerful spell that allows one to block any attack, even a dragon's breath. This piques Kenichi's interest, as it could help protect Anemone from future adversities. With that, he agrees to help Eupatorium. But before starting the construction, he needs funds. Having said that, he asks Eupatorium to give him any unused furniture she has, so he can appraise it and obtain money from his system. When he finishes, Kenichi earns about 120 million yen, which should be more than enough to cover the costs of the job, and thus, he is ready to begin. Everyone gets into Kenichi's car, which takes them to the construction site. On the way, Eupatorium asks Kenichi if he really doesn't want her body as a reward, and our protagonist firmly responds that he has no interest. This upsets Eupatorium, as she knows he has no problem getting involved with beast women, so why wouldn't he get involved with her? And amidst this vital dilemma for our narrative, they finally arrive at the construction site and Kenichi meets Miley's brothers, Nyakero, Nyamero, and Nyanji. Kenichi mentions that it's good to see them again, but is curious about why they are working on the construction, as they received a large sum of money as a reward for taking down Shaga. So they should be set for a good while. However, according to them, one thing led to another, and they already blew through the money and are broke again. Suddenly, Nyamena appears to see what's going on, and as soon as Miley's brothers see her, they practically fall in love. As the scene progresses, Kanan introduces Kenichi to Porridge, the man she hired to oversee the construction. Porridge says she didn't need to come in person, but she insists it's important, as she brought someone to help, mentioning that Kenichi can significantly speed up the process since he is a mage. But Kenichi corrects her, saying he is just a merchant. Regardless, Porridge has no reason to refuse additional help and decides to continue his work, asking the Viscountess to take a look at the list of necessary equipment. While she reviews the list, Primula also takes a look and is horrified by the prices. She asks the Viscountess to let her handle the list, and after reading everything, she concludes that Porridge is trying to scam her. Porridge defends himself, saying he needs to make a profit from the business and that there are no other merchants from whom Eupatorium can order so many axes. However, he was wrong on that last point, as Primula simply turns to Kenichi and asks if he can get many axes, and our protagonist, obliging his wife, buys an axe from his store and asks Eupatorium if an axe like that would work, to which she mentions it's perfect, but is curious about the price. Primula then says she only needs to pay 1 silver coin per axe, which is a ridiculously low price, so Kanan asks if Kenichi is really okay with that, and he says she can consider it a friend's discount. The Viscountess is delighted by this and decides to buy from Kenichi, meaning things went south for Mr. Nose. The guy is obviously furious and reminds her that he is there representing the Thogalum Trading Company, and going against them is not good for her. Kenichi remembers that Thogalum was precisely responsible for all the problems at Primula's Corolla restaurant, and apparently he is so influential that even the Lord occasionally asks for his help, and he understands that clashing with him could cause many problems. However, at the moment, building the canal is more important, so everyone starts working immediately. Since his excavator will be used intensively, Kenichi will need a lot of fuel. He then pours 3 basins of fuel, and a few minutes later, they begin working. Kenichi's machine provides significant help, as it does in minutes the work that would take hours. We then see that after a long day of work, Kenichi prepares a meal for his friends, and since Kanan's transportation hasn't arrived yet, he invites her to dinner. Our protagonist then prepares some chicken karaage, and she is surprised that he can prepare such good food in the middle of the forest, and the taste is absolutely delicious. Kenichi notices Nyanji and the others looking at the food from afar, and invites them to eat with him. But they are not the only ones hungry, as practically all the workers are starving, since the restaurant that turns into a tavern at night where they usually eat is in the city, and it would be too expensive to make the trip and eat there. Primula feels sorry for them and has an idea. She asks Kenichi for permission to use his recipe and feed all the workers, mentioning that she will obviously charge, but at a fair price so everyone can eat. The workers are happy to have food, and the workplace practically turns into a party, and Kanan loves the lively atmosphere. Then, the day ends and night falls, and our protagonist prepares a bath and tells the Viscountess that she can use it to clean herself. She is impressed that Kenichi can create a bath in the middle of the forest, but as he is about to leave, she grabs his arm and orders him to bathe with her. Kenichi tries to resist, as he is technically married to Primula and needs to take care of Anemone, so he can't just give in to his desires. She mentions that she admires how much Kenichi cares for his family, as in her case, her family barely recognizes her as a person, since all her parents cared about was who she would marry. Kenichi says that sounds sad, but has nothing to do with him, so he leaves the bathroom before Eupatorium tries to seduce him again. The next morning, Kenichi wakes up early, and the first thing he sees is the Viscountess working hard to distribute food to the workers, and for a moment, our protagonist, who is extremely committed to preserving his family, looks at her and for a moment realizes that he might not be as committed as he thought and obviously not thinking with his head. He simply mentions that she looks so beautiful without makeup that it even caught his attention. And upon mentioning this, the girls approach, as they notice what he is thinking. But Kenichi says it's not quite like that, as she is a married woman, and he is smart enough to avoid that drama. And I don't know if that's true. Kanan mentions that she knows Kenichi doesn't want to give in to her. But since she has an entire month with him, sooner or later, she will make him yield. Then, a few moments later, Mr. Nose and another person return to the worksite to complain, as none of the workers have been going to their tavern to eat. Primula explains that this is because she started selling food at an affordable price, so the workers no longer need to go to their tavern. And she makes it clear that the reason they lost their customers is not because Primula stole them, but because their prices were too high. So if they want to recover, they need to be more honest in their business. After that, work continues as usual. And after the trees are cut down, Kenichi uses his excavator to collect all the wood and debris into his storage. They are making good progress on the canal, and by midday, Eupatorium's servants finally arrive, increasing the number of people on site. But water starts to become a problem. He could buy water from his store, but it would be too expensive, so he decides to make a deal with the beast folk, who apparently live cleanly, so they mention a nearby spring, but it's practically impossible to reach without feline agility. Kenichi offers them some alcohol in exchange for water, and they seal the deal instantly, solving Kenichi's water supply problem. While the beast folk enjoy the alcohol, Kenichi says he is going to bed. But before he can leave, a drunk Eupatorium puts her arm around him and starts dragging him to the room. And well, how can I narrate this? She insisted, and he didn't resist. Anyway, we can't know for sure, but what we do know is that a little later, the Viscountess falls asleep, and Kenichi leaves the room, trying to return to the main house, but Anemone doesn't let him in, as she knows what he did. Well, at least Kenichi apparently got away with it, as he made her sign a contract stating she would follow his instructions from now on. She even threw a tantrum, but he mentioned that it's a no, and that's final, and with that, perhaps the problems related to this will become less frequent. After that, the work progressed steadily, and because of that, they managed to complete the Astrantia section of the canal within the deadline. And Kenichi reports to us that the celebration of this conclusion took place solemnly in the presence of the royal family, who arrived from the capital. Kenichi even mentions that he was pressured to attend the ceremony, and, to make things worse, they started talking about his achievements. And as he mentioned, it's impossible to stop people from talking. In fact, our protagonist even had to summon his backhoe and put on a little show to entertain the people there. After the ceremony, Kanan is approached by Viscount Thunbergia, who doesn't believe that the mage who defeated Shaga is actually in Astrantia, also saying that he was sure they would lose their lands and have to flee the country. But the Viscountess laughs in his face and says that the only joke around here should be his sickly face. Kenichi sees all this and assumes it's just a rivalry between nobles. But Primula notices something disturbing, mentioning that there is an elderly man in Thunbergia's carriage, and that scoundrel is the same man who lost his status in Dahlia, after it was discovered that he had hired Shaga to kidnap Primula. The next day, Kenichi meets Graham, Kanan's husband, who wants to personally thank Kenichi for all the help he provided to complete the project. Until now, he hadn't put much effort into maintaining his territory, but after almost losing it due to the deadline, he mentions he is ready to change. Additionally, there is one more thing he wants to talk to Kenichi about, as he found a book that Kenichi sold some time ago and wants to know how he made them. Kenichi shows Graham the entire printing process, and he listens attentively to every word. After Kenichi teaches him how to make the prints, they continue talking, and Graham says he would like to hire Primula to manage the finances of his lands. Primula thanks him for the opportunity, but it would be too much for her to handle alone, so she asks Graham if she can ask her father for help. He knows that Mallow is an important figure in Dahlia, so he would be happy to have such a good merchant working with him. But he isn't sure if it would be a good idea, as establishing connections with one of Dahlia's most influential merchants could provoke Thogalum. Kenichi has been hearing a lot about Thogalum recently, so he asks why Graham doesn't just expel Thogalum from there, since he clearly doesn't like him. Graham is embarrassed to admit it. But with his land's current budget, they can't afford to hire an order of knights. So, if there were a battle against Thogalum and his men, it's safe to say they would lose. However, the Viscountess tells her husband that they have a good chance of winning, as they have Kenichi and his magical machine. and she is sure Kenichi would be willing to fight for them. After all, he is their friend. Kenichi doesn't like to get involved in trouble, but since the situation is serious, he agrees to help fight Thogalum if necessary. The scene then changes, and later, our protagonist and the others return to their original location, and Kenichi puts the house back in place. They also receive the high protection grimoire that the Viscountess promised, so Anemone can start learning to use the spell soon. But before that, it's time for the gang to relax and take a bath while looking at the stars. We then see that Lilith informed a maid that she would visit her mother. Upon arriving at the Queen's office, she mentioned that something interesting had happened, and the woman confirmed that Viscount Eupatorium's team had miraculously completed the canal on time, contrary to the predictions of that scoundrel Thunbergia. This guy, who according to the Queen ranks at the bottom of the anti-royalty faction, had sent letters stating that Eupatorium would fail to deliver the canal on schedule. He not only questioned his rival's ability to govern, but also presented himself as an ideal candidate for the position of Viscount. However, a mage who summoned previously unseen iron beasts appeared and completed the construction in record time. Lilith confessed her desire to meet this much-talked-about mage, considering him the kind of man who deserves the power of a sacred knight. We then return to the moment where our protagonist and the others are bathing, and Nyamena speculated that Anemone's ability to use magic must come from someone like her mother, an idea that made perfect sense to Kenichi. He mentioned that the girl had never spoken about her biological mother, and the girl, in turn, reveals that the only thing she knows about her is that she was the one who gave her her name, while our protagonist thinks that the woman who raised Anemone might have adopted her from a woman who died on the streets. He offered to search for the girl's family, but she immediately refused and left. As Anemone walked away, Nyamena mentioned that a woman doesn't need anything else when she's with the man she loves, and Kenichi just pushes Nyamena away, asking if she's out of her mind for not considering their age. The scene changes, and the next day, Anemone finally receives her registered grimoire from that witch. Our protagonist took the opportunity to ask if she knew any mage who had lived in the region but died on the streets about 10 years ago, and she immediately realized he was looking for the little girl's mother. About that, she wasn't sure if the mage had died on the streets, but she remembered someone with the same hair color. She was known as Armeria the Silver, who had disappeared around that time. Moreover, Armeria was the previous owner of the grimoire that Anemone now holds. The witch questioned whether the girl really wanted to find her mother, and Kenichi mentioned that she didn't. And at that moment, the witch said something very similar to what Nyamena had said, mentioning that what matters to women is the man they're with. Kenichi obviously points out once again that he's old enough to be her father, and damn, people in this universe have some really strange ideas. Later, on the way home, Anemone decided to open the grimoire and began reciting the high protection spell, and a shield formed, but we see that it soon broke for some reason. Kenichi ran toward his adoptive daughter and asked what had happened, and she said she had a stomachache. Our protagonist panicked, since emergency services like 192 don't work in his world, while Miley tried to calm him down by suggesting that what was happening seemed to be the scent of a human woman blooming. Anemone thought she was going to die because she had been so happy since meeting Kenichi, but our protagonist tells her to calm down, calling Miley to the house. At that moment, Primula and Nyamena had come home early to our protagonist's relief, and as the plot unfolded, Primula gave Anemone a painkiller that seemed effective, as she appeared to be fine again for now. The girl told her adoptive father that she could now have children, and he noted that this was cause for celebration. The girl mentioned that it would be nice to have a child with Kenichi, which obviously made him spit out his tea in shock. He then tries to explain that she needs to grow up a bit more before thinking about such things, at least 5 years, as certain development is needed for breastfeeding. And Primula scolds him for what he's saying. But he then explains that it's common for daughters when they're young to say they love their father and will marry him, until, as they grow up, they meet someone else and get married. Primula asks if this is a hint at her, revealing that she had said the same thing to Mr. Mallow when she was younger, meaning he hit the nail on the head. That night, they then held a party to celebrate Anemone's milestone, and Kenichi confessed that it seemed a bit old-fashioned to serve red rice on such an occasion, but he truly believed it was something worth celebrating. A few days later, we see that a carriage suddenly appeared at our protagonist's house, and out stepped Primula's father, who had come for a visit. After learning that everything was going well with his daughter's restaurant, Mr. Mallow discussed with Kenichi a way to get rid of Tsuuhan. Before this, our protagonist had bought a table with chairs and an umbrella so they could sit there comfortably and discuss other matters. But Mallow and his daughter's first reaction was to inspect the items and consider how profitable it would be to sell them. So then everyone sits down and Kenichi directly asks for Primula's hand in marriage from her father. Our protagonist thinks to himself that he's never had luck with women until now and even thought he'd never say these words, especially in another world. Hearing this, Mallow laughs, believing there was nothing to ask since his daughter had forced her way into the man's life. He even apologizes for his daughter's stubbornness, as it had been 10 years since he lost his wife and had to raise the girl alone, probably making Primula feel lonely. And after the father-in-law's acceptance, we then have another celebration party that lasted until nightfall. Kenichi then narrates that soon the Mallows would prepare to establish a branch of the Mallow Company in Astrantia, besides the fact that they would send more workers to the center of this land and help restore Eupatorium's finances. And Kenichi recognizes that they want to take control of this domain, financially speaking. The next morning, Anemone asked to go with her father, but he told her to stay at Mary's house, as it would be dangerous if the girl used her magic and caused a fire in the city. And parallel to this, we see that a carriage with Crouton and the Nyanyas has just arrived. When Norspol got out of the vehicle and realized that Kenichi and Primula had gotten married, the man fell to his knees. He had found out through Crouton that the woman was there and then decided to come along when the man went to fetch the family. However, the fact that she had married Kenichi makes Norspol do nothing but accept it graciously. The scene then changes, and we see that Thogalum has just learned through his employees about the recent movements of the Mallow Company, and this makes him very angry. In another scene change, the protagonist then arrives in town along with his friends. Excited, the Viscountess asks her husband if it would be possible to build a road to Kenichi's house once all this is completed, but our protagonist reminds her that it would be smarter to recover financially before considering such a project. However, he informs the Baron and the others to wait there, and then goes to the entrance of Thogalum's merchant company. Pretending to want to negotiate, he approaches the company's vendors and pulls a giant spider from his inventory to throw into the middle of the stalls. The merchant asks if he's looking for a fight, and he confirms without hesitation that that's exactly why he came. Thogalum then comes running down to find out what's causing the commotion, and Kenichi takes the opportunity to introduce himself as the much-talked-about mage of the region, promising to get revenge for everything this man did to his wife's restaurant. Thogalum orders his employees to teach the intruder a lesson, but they all look at the dead spider and think that a cruel fate awaits them, so it would be prudent to try to resolve things calmly. The boss argues that surely this guy just stored the giant insect in his item box and didn't kill it, so Kenichi puts the arachnid away again when he realizes things are about to heat up. Likewise, Crouton, Nyanyas, Maeli, and Niamena advance, while Norspol appears next, drawing his wolf-fang sword. Last but not least, our majestic Velvet appears and advances, scaring the cat people who work for the merchant company. Kenichi uses this race's faith to emphasize that the sacred links would never join a villain, and questions what will happen to their souls if they die fighting against the links, which is nothing less than a messenger of their god. Immediately, the Miantes flee from there to avoid committing such a grave sin, forcing Thogalum to run inside the company to gather the rest of his gang. Once inside, facing a greater number of defenders, a dogman laughs while holding his weapon and states that it was a mistake to trust cats, as always. Thogalum asks if the guests will get rid of the unwanted visitors, and he confirms with his whole group that dealing with these stray cats won't be a problem. Velvet growls at the leader of the dogs, since it was this bastard who shot the arrow at him the day Kenichi met the animal. Remembering this well, the dogman announces that fate has brought them together again and attacks without hesitation. Norspol advances and blocks the enemy's blow, while Niamena shows her exceptional skill with the bow by taking down a large number of opponents one by one. Likewise, Maeli swears to protect the sacred animal of her culture by finishing off all the dogs on the other side of the trench. Nyanyas joins the attack and flips 2 dog humanoids, while Norspol stays busy with the company's main adversary. In a quick move, the dog throws a knife quickly at the human warrior, but Velvet intervenes and prevents the ally from being injured. Finally, it's the turn of the supposed Mage of Dahlia to advance, summoning his excavator in the middle of the battlefield. Always naming each strike he makes with this device, our protagonist destroys the source of the Thogalum company to throw the stones at the enemies, stating that this is one of the 3 melee weapons that suck your soul to nirvana. And after defeating all opponents, only their boss remains. Kenichi chases the man with his excavator, but decides to store the vehicle to summon an even larger excavator that fits like a glove to knock down Thogalum's entire shop. After the first blow to the construction, Thogalum goes crazy and begs Kenichi to stop. Our protagonist apparently isn't willing to back down, but Mallow appears and asks that the destruction stop there, since they could use the place for a branch of the Mallow company. Seeing the enemy's intention, Thogalum questions whether he really thinks he'll get away with it after all he's done. But Nyamena and Miley point their bows at the villain and show that he's in no position to want to imply anything. Kenichi points out that Thogalum's henchmen became criminals when they tried to kill the Viscount as soon as they drew their weapons, until Gram Eupatorium appears to remind them that they've always had a complicated history, but he didn't expect him to go this far and try to attack his life. Thogalum then accuses Gram of betrayal, to which Gram finds it strange, since he never allied with him. Meanwhile, Kenichi reflects that he thought Eupatorium seemed like a dubious noble, but he has good courage. Finally, the Viscount announces that if Thogalum leaves Astrantia immediately, he won't be formally accused of trying to kill him, but must leave his belongings behind, and seeing that he's lost this battle, Thogalum kneels, implying his surrender. Later, after gathering his belongings and family before entering the carriage, the owner of the ruined merchant company tells Mallow that the brooches he sold to the nobles of Dahlia, or even to the Dracena, were all because of this new mage he partnered with, but he raises a question about why he thinks Primula was kidnapped. Without an answer at that moment, we see that a servant delivers a personal message to the Viscount from King Ranunculus Kadan, requesting the mage Kenichi's presence in the royal capital immediately. Hearing this, Thogalum laughs and warns him to be careful since, as the saying goes, the nail that sticks out gets hammered down. After the villain's departure, Kenichi faces a wave of unanswered questions in his mind, initially wondering why he brought up the subject of Primula's kidnapping, since as far as he knows, it happened because some noble paid Shaga to do it. Kenichi starts to ponder a bit more and thinks that it might have been the neighboring lord who could have been pulling the strings behind it, trying to dominate both Astrantia and Dahlia. At this moment, he remembers Crouton saying that Zutara is connected to Dahlia's Bacopa, and as he deduces, he comes to a conclusion. Primula was kidnapped so that the Mallows would lose prestige. Prestige that was obtained thanks to him, and well, when all is said and done, he was the one responsible for the kidnapping, albeit indirectly. At this moment, the scene changes, and we see that Kenichi informs the Mallows that he wants to stop selling products to them for a while to try to live a normal life. Despite this, now he's been summoned by the king, and he fears that this might lead to several other problems that he'll have to solve later. Speaking only for herself, Primula doesn't see this as a problem, since great profits require great risks. And Kenichi reminds her that the girl almost died at Shaga's hands. But she includes this fact in her narrative and remembers that one of the company's mottos is that business is conducted for someone's happiness. In this case, the Mallow company is ready for this, and Primula decided to stand by Kenichi. She always knew that one day he would catch the king's attention for his great deeds, and well, the time to reap these fruits, whether he likes it or not, has come, emphasizing that she'll be there to support him. At dawn, Anemone gifts Mary with a book she made in secret, making her friend very happy. As the girl's family's carriage departs, Norspol assures that Crouton will play a key role in his kingdom, while Anemone and Mary say goodbye, promising to see each other again. As the carriage moves away with everyone inside, the young mage runs after the vehicle, shouting her best friend's name. Miley and Nyamena then help her by taking her to her friend for one last goodbye. Then, finally, Crouton's family leaves definitively for Norspol's barony. After that, Kenichi as a precaution stores his house and all his belongings in his inventory. And back in town, he questions Eupatorium about what would happen if he ran away instead of going to the royal capital. And the Viscount confesses that it's not very wise to disobey a king's orders, especially because they might suspect that he himself hid the mage somewhere. And taking this into account, our protagonist has no choice but to go to him. Kenichi initially thought about leaving the women somewhere else to not involve them in this, but of course, they all insisted on joining this journey. With this, the episode ends, and the question remains, why was Kenichi summoned? We'll discover the answer to this and other questions in the next episode.